Yesterday, I was hit by a truck after singing a rap on the street. Before losing consciousness completely, a reversing vehicle ran over me. When I woke up, I found myself lying in bed, aching all over with bruises that looked like boot prints. Suddenly, strange memories flooded my brain. It turned out I had transmigrated. My name in this world is also Zhao Shi, a 20-year-old trainee fitter in a steel rolling mill. The night before, I ran into Yi Zhonghai on the street without greeting him and even snorted at him. Because of this, Jia Dongshu and his gang put a sack over my head in the dark and beat me up. While I was processing these memories, a middle-aged woman walked into the bedroom. I was stunned because she looked exactly like my mother from my past life. She checked my forehead to see if my fever had broken and expressed her deep care for me. I tentatively dropped a past life reference, but she scolded me in a low voice, warning me not to speak nonsense about feudal remnants. She then asked if it was the Jia family and Yi Zhonghe from the middle courtyard who had bullied me. I blinked in confirmation. Determined to get justice for me, she picked up an arm-thick wooden stick behind the door and rushed out instantly. I couldn't stop her in time, but I wasn't too worried. In this world, my mother was born with superhuman strength and works swinging a 10-kilogram sledgehammer at the steel rolling mill. She is much stronger than Liu Haizhong. Soon after, chaos erupted in the middle courtyard. Screams and Jia Zhongshi's loud, heart-wrenching wails resounded, claiming that they were being bullied as widows and orphans, and calling on old Jia to take away my mother, Mrs. Zhao Wang. I walked over to the door frame, connecting the front and middle courtyards to watch the scene. My mother was chasing Yi Zhonghai and Jia Dongshu all over the yard, while a fat man secretly tried to trip Yi Zhonghai. As I watched the commotion unfold, someone beside me praised my mother's formidable strength, recalling how she was famous for her power in the surrounding area. As I watched the chaotic scene unfold, a young Shu Damao, home for the weekend, approached me in confusion. When he asked if Dongshu had really beaten me up, I angrily confirmed it. Dongshu had ambushed me after I used the toilet because he lacked the courage to face me directly. Though Dongshu and I entered the steel rolling mill through our parents' positions, our families never got along. My mother and I despised Jia Zhongshi's petty theft, while they viewed us as hypocritical. Plus, both my mother and I earned good incomes as factory workers, making our financial situation far better than theirs. After finishing her rampage, my mother greeted Liu Haizhong, who secretly approved of her actions against Yi Zhonghai. Seeing that I was well enough to stand outside, my mother invited me inside, mentioning she had bought meat to help me recover. After we left, Yi Zhonghai shouted a weak defense before his wife helped him home. Meanwhile, Jia Dongshu hid indoors, accidentally hitting Jia Zhongxi with the door when she tried to enter. She pinched him in anger and scolded him for provoking our family. Dongshu inwardly regretted his actions, having originally intended to ambush Yi Zhonghai to force an apprenticeship, only for things to go wrong. Back inside our home, I looked at the photograph hanging on the wall. The man in the picture was the image of my father from my previous life, just with a more resolute expression. Seeing me stare lost in thought, my mother came over to comfort me. Realizing how tall I had grown and that I was nearly 20, she directly asked what kind of girl I would like to marry. Without thinking, the image of Qin Huairu flashed in my mind, and I blurted out that I wanted someone like her, quickly clamping my mouth shut right after. Curious about who Qin Huairu was, my mother pressed me for details. Stuttering, I explained that I had seen her on the street before, guessing she was around 17 or 18 and lived somewhere in rural Changping. My mother scolded me for hesitating like a woman and promised to hire a matchmaker to track her down, willing to pay extra since our family was financially comfortable from our factory work and father's compensation. Although she originally preferred finding a factory colleague's daughter, she was glad to accommodate my preference. When she asked if I was well enough for work tomorrow, I assured her I could handle it, intending to tell my master about Yi Zhonghai's actions to cause him trouble. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried every phrase and incantation I could think of to trigger a cheat system, but nothing happened. Realizing I had no special system or golden finger, I felt disappointed at first. However, I soon made peace with it, deciding that my memories of the future would be my greatest asset once reform and opening up arrived. Being practically illiterate in traditional Chinese characters, I had no desire to push through academic hardships or political struggles. I felt content staying a proud worker, enjoying a comfortable life, and starting a family. That night, I dreamed of a young Qin Huairu, resolved to marry her not only for her beauty and family-oriented nature, but also to get revenge on Dongshu for ambushing me. My mother woke me up early in the morning for work. Still half asleep, I thought my modern alarm was going off, but touching the rough bedding brought me back to the reality of being a fitter apprentice in the Shiheiwan. I put on my worn work clothes and rubber shoes, then joined my mother for a simple breakfast of thin porridge and coarse steamed buns. On our way out, we ran into Yi Zhonghai and Jia Dongshu. They instantly froze and looked away. My mother snorted and pulled me past them. Since she had already beaten them up the day before, I kept my composure, knowing that revenge is best served calculated. When we reached the steel rolling mill, I spotted my master, Chen Yuanhai. I hurried over, greeted him, and carried his heavy tool bag as a dutiful apprentice should. Lowering my voice with aggrieved emotion, I told him how Yi Zhonghai and Jia Dongshu had ambushed me with a sack over my head 2 nights ago, hitting me near the latrines. Outraged by their lawless behavior and seeing it as a direct insult to himself, my master promised to take care of the matter for me. Soon after entering the workshop, Yi Zhonghai felt an eerie chill. My master immediately applied strict quality control standards to Yi Zhonghai's recent batch of parts. Under these high standards, the parts that usually barely passed were rejected by quality control, forcing Yi Zhonghai to rework them and face a monetary fine. Realizing my master was closely scrutinizing him, Yi Zhonghai stood with an ashen face, regretting ever getting involved in Jia Dongshu's scheme. After my master assigned me some standard parts to process, I focused entirely on my workstation. As a third-year apprentice, I was already a semi-technician capable of operating machinery independently. However, as soon as I picked up my file today, my hand felt unusually steady and precise. Even more surprising was the sudden clarity in my mind. Optimized techniques for filing, tool changing, and wrist angles emerged naturally in my thoughts. Unlike before when I relied purely on muscle memory, my brain now formed precise 3-dimensional models and optimal operation paths in advance. Surprised by this sudden change, I accidentally slipped and ruined a workpiece. I quickly forced myself to calm down and guided my movements using these optimized thoughts. My actions became incredibly fluid, rhythmically smoothing each part with ease. Before I knew it, I reached for more materials, only to find the basket completely empty. All the parts were already finished and neatly stacked. Tasks that normally took me 6 or 7 hours were completed before lunch at 11:30 a.m. As the factory bell rang, I realized this heightened mental ability and efficiency was my actual cheat code. Accepting this new ability, I put aside my lingering doubts and hurried to the cafeteria to secure food and a seat for my master. In the bustling cafeteria, I quickly secured a great spot near the window and saved seats for my master, Chen Yuanhai, and myself. After making Yi Zhonghai rework several defective parts, my master finally arrived at the table. I proudly showed him our lunch boxes, which I had filled with generous portions of braised pork and cabbage by arriving early and giving the chef a cigarette. Looking toward the window, I watched Yi Zhonghai receive a meager, meatless portion of food at the end of the line, which cheered me up considerably. I knew Jia Dongshu was trying to become Yi Zhonghai's apprentice after his own mentor left, but I resolved not to let him off easily either. After lunch, work resumed, and I approached my master to report that I had already finished my assigned tasks and checked their precision. Surprised and somewhat skeptical, he brought his calipers over to inspect my workstation. Upon measuring piece after piece, his expression transformed from suspicion to sheer delight. Every single item fell well within the optimal tolerance range with top-grade precision. My master patted my shoulder proudly and praised my exceptional hand stability and cutting consistency. Attributing my sudden improvement to a clear mind and good mood, I accepted his praise humbly. Seeing my remarkable progress, my master decided then and there that it was time to teach me more advanced core techniques. My master led me to a corner of the workshop and brought out a basket of semi-finished steering connectors. These complex parts were meant for level 2 mechanics, requiring smaller tolerances and precise curved finishes. He promised that if I could master these workpieces with high quality, he would personally apply to make me a permanent employee. The thought of becoming a full-fledged worker made my heart surge with excitement. My monthly salary would jump from 180,000 to around 300,000 old currency, significantly raising my social status. Lacking any magical space or cheat system, I realized my rebirth had specifically enhanced my physical steady-handedness and mechanical talent, making this raise the most practical reward. Exacting my gratitude, I pledged to work hard. My master teased that with a full employee's income, I would soon be a sought-after young man, offering to help me find a partner. I blushingly admitted. My mother was already arranging a match for me through someone back in our hometown, promising to bring my future wife to kowtow to him when the time came. Pleased by this, my master shifted into serious teaching mode. He performed a silent first demonstration, slowing down his movements so I could observe the exact angles, pressure, and trajectories. I carefully touched the resulting part to memorize its smooth, precise feel. On his second run, he explained each step in detail, including tool choices and error control. Though I usually took written notes, this time my mind dynamically simulated and visualized the entire process in high resolution. Before he could start a fourth explanation, I asked if I could try it myself. Impressed by my confidence, my master stepped aside. I felt the weight of the blank metal part, and as I looked at it, invisible guidelines seemed to appear in my mind, showing the exact depth, cuts, and paths to take. I replicated my master's steady gestures and calm rhythm effortlessly. Stunned by how closely my work matched his own expert style, my master picked up his calipers and standard gauges to measure the finished piece meticulously. Holding calipers and gauges, my master measured the parts I had trial processed. Seeing my tense expectation, he smiled and praised me, confirming that most of the pieces passed with great stability. He instructed me to take the basket back to my workstation to practice further, encouraging me to strive for perfection. Relieved and excited, I carried the heavy basket back to my seat, deeply grateful for my physical talent and mental enhancements. I immediately focused on fixing the few minor flaws to secure a high pass rate. Not far away, Jia Dongsu watched us with envy and bitterness. Seeing my master personally guide me and give me higher grade work, he convinced himself that I was just lucky to have a dedicated mentor. Completely ignoring his own laziness, he believed he would easily outperform me if given the same guidance. Unbothered by his jealousy, I remained fully absorbed in my work, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment as the rough metal blanks transformed into smooth, precise components under my tools. By the time the end-of-shift bell rang, I had already completed more than half of the basket. Stretching my neck, I saw my master relaxing with his tea mug, having long finished his daily quota. As I considered finishing the rest of the parts, my master stopped me, reminding me that we had no reason to work unpaid overtime for a private factory once our quota was met. Realizing his point, I returned the remaining semi-finished items to the collection area. Leaving the workshop together with our tool bags, my master looked over at Yi Zhonghai with a subtle, satisfied smile. Swamped with both his standard quota and the heavy rework tasks from yesterday, Yi Zhonghai was dripping with sweat and forced to stay behind. As we stepped out, I looked back and saw Jia Dongshu trying to curry favor by offering to help Yi Zhonghai, who remained thoroughly annoyed and ignored him. After parting ways with my master, I walked home alone. At the entrance of South Luogu Lane, I spotted Liu Haizhong from the backyard, walking with his hands behind his back and a manager's posture. I stepped up and greeted him politely. He put on official airs, asking if I worked hard at the factory today or embarrassed our neighborhood. Spotting his 11-year-old son, Liu Guangqi, playing with stones nearby, I immediately saw an opportunity. I put on a concerned smile and subtly criticized Guangqi for playing instead of doing his homework, while praising his potential to become a great scholar and future leader. Soothed by my flattering words, Liu Haizhong's stern face softened. Determined to raise an official, he immediately rushed over, kicked away the stone fortress Guangxi had built, and dragged his son home by the ear to study. Watching them leave, I picked up a flat gray stone slab from the ground to pad my table legs later. Entering the front courtyard, I ran into Yan Bugui carrying an enamel basin. At this point in time, he was not yet the notoriously stingy man of later years, and was quite friendly toward the neighbors. Back in my room, I lit the stove to heat up leftover steamed buns for dinner. Soon after, my mother, Wang Xiulan, returned home carrying a wrapped package of braised pork intestine. Surprised by the rare treat, I teased her about the occasion. She laughed, explaining she was in a great mood today, and affectionately patted my back. However, her superhuman strength sent a heavy blow through my spine, making me cough violently. Realizing her mistake, she quickly rubbed my back while complaining that I was as thin as a bean sprout. After recovering my breath, I begged her to spare me her strength and asked what joyful news had made her so happy. My mother returned home, bursting with pride, to share two pieces of great news. First, thanks to the Street Women's Federation, intervening to promote equal pay for equal work, the factory leadership approved a raise that brought her salary to the same level as male master craftsmen of her rank. I was genuinely thrilled for her, as this recognized her true worth and skill. The second piece of news was about my marriage prospects. She went to see matchmaker Qian to inquire about girls from Qin family village, and to her delight, matchmaker Qian immediately recognized the Qin family. Since my mother already knew her, we saved money on extra matchmaking bribes. Knowing that Jia Zhangxi was too stingy to invest money in matchmakers, I knew our generous deposit would make us matchmaker Qian's top priority. As I poured my mother a bowl of water, I remained composed, reflecting on our family's advantages. We were a stable, dual-income family with simple relationships and my solid technical career ahead. Although some might fear my mother's fierce reputation, I knew my own worth. Qin Huairu was a great option, but with my growing skills and future prospects, I felt peaceful about letting things take their natural course based on true compatibility. Meanwhile, at her home, matchmaker Qian joyfully counted the 30,000 old currency notes my mother had paid her. Previously, the Qin family had approached her to find a city husband for their beautiful daughter, Qin Huairu. Matchmaker Qian had originally considered Jia Dongshu, fearing my mother might look down on a rural girl or lose her famous temper. However, receiving my mother's generous deposit changed everything. Comparing my strong background, lack of heavy family burdens, and promising career to Jia Dongshu's stingy family, matchmaker Qian decided that I was the far superior choice. She resolved to visit Qin family village early the next morning to enthusiastically pitch me as the ideal groom. During our short afternoon break, my master Chen Yuanhai strolled over to my workstation. Seeing my growing stability with level 2 parts, he handed me a new blueprint and a blank. He reminded me that fitting requires brain power and taught me to independently read drawings to analyze processes. I solemnly took the blueprint, recognizing this as another test to build my foundation toward becoming a top-notch technician. Meanwhile, matchmaker Qian took an ox cart back to the countryside, eager to fulfill her agreement with my mother. On the way, she struck up a conversation with a fellow passenger, only to discover the woman was also a matchmaker. Cursing her bad luck, matchmaker Qian quickly hid her real objective, claiming she was just visiting her mother. Once she arrived at her parents' home in Qianjiao, her sister-in-law welcomed her warmly, delighted by the daozhangkun pastries and fruit candies matchmaker Qian brought for the family. Thanks to her generous nature and reliability, matchmaker Qian enjoyed a great reputation in the surrounding villages. Enjoying a bowl of stir-fried noodles with a poached egg, she planned to head to Qin family village later that afternoon to enthusiastically promote me to the Qin family. While matchmaker Qian was eating noodles at her parents' home, Qin Huairu's mother, sister-in-law Qin, arrived with a gift of wild mushrooms. Eager for news about her daughter's marriage prospects, she immediately sought out matchmaker Qian. Seeing how much the Qin family valued the matter, matchmaker Qian felt completely confident holding me as her ultimate trump card. Sitting down to talk, matchmaker Qian explained that she had initially looked into the Jia family from the same courtyard. She described Jia Dongshu as a city resident, with a healthy mother to help with children, which initially delighted Mrs. Qin. However, matchmaker Qian changed the topic, pointing out that Jia Dongshu was still an apprentice with a low salary, meaning Qin Huairu would struggle financially if she married him. Mrs. Qin agreed, hesitant about letting her daughter endure hardship. Seeing the perfect opportunity, matchmaker Qian revealed that she had found a far superior option in the same courtyard, my family. She highlighted that both my mother and I were full-time workers at the steel rolling mill, earning double wages. Mrs. Qin and matchmaker Qian's sister-in-law were astonished by our exceptional financial standing. Matchmaker Qian praised me as strong, skilled, and highly regarded by factory masters with great potential for promotions. She suggested arranging a meeting between Qin Huairu and me first, leaving the Jia family as a secondary backup option. Overjoyed and profoundly grateful, Mrs. Qin praised matchmaker Qian for being so thoughtful. Matchmaker Qian painted a rosy picture of Qin Huairu's potential life with us, staying home to manage light chores, while both my mother and I earned money in the factory. Even matchmaker could not help but feel a bit envious of the comfortable, secure city life awaiting Qin Huairu if the match succeeded. That evening, my mother gathered our whole family in the main room right after dinner to announce the great news. Aunt Qian had returned to the village specifically to share a perfect marriage prospect for me in the city. Hearing this, my cheeks flushed, and my heart pounded with a deep longing for city life. However, my father, puffing on his pipe by the door, grumbled that I would be better off marrying Liu Neng, a hard-working farmer from the neighboring village. The mere thought of Liu Neng, a quiet, dull man burdened by his impoverished family, made me pale with dread. My mother immediately exploded, scolding my father for trying to push me into a fire pit. My older brothers, Qin Yu and Qin Ma, also firmly rejected the idea, pointing out that Liu Neng was completely drained by his poor family and could never offer me a good life. Embarrassed by everyone's strong opposition, my father stopped arguing and sulked in silence. Turning her attention back to me, my mother happily shared the details of Aunt Qian's match. The family lived in South Luogu Lane in the city, held official city residency, and both the mother and son worked at the Red Star steel rolling plant. My mother excitedly estimated their high combined monthly income, explaining that the future mother-in-law was a master craftsman and the young man, Zhao Shi, was a full-time worker with great skills and future promotion prospects. She painted a vivid picture of my potential life in the city. Since both mother and son would eat lunch at the factory cafeteria, I would only need to prepare 2 meals a day, do light laundry, and keep the house tidy. I would be spared from harsh field labor, feeding pigs, and enduring the elements, living comfortably like a city lady. Listening to her description, my sisters-in-law looked on with undeniable envy. Looking at my supportive mother and brothers, my longing for the city became concrete, and I made up my mind to embrace this opportunity. Over the past 2 days, I unlocked my full potential and rapidly familiarized myself with most low-level worker parts in the workshop, consistently producing excellent work. During lunch break, my master Chen Yuanhai inspected my finished parts and praised my rapid transformation. Thrilled by my progress, he wanted to head to the factory office immediately to secure my full-time employee status. I quickly held him back, reminding him that the office staff were likely still napping and that rushing over might annoy them. Pleased with my thoughtful demeanor, my master agreed to wait a couple of hours. Nearby, Jia Dongshu tried hard to curry favor with Yi Zhonghai, while watching us with envy and secret bitterness. Unbothered by him, I focused entirely on my technical growth. Desiring to improve my ability to read complex technical drawings, I approached my master for guidance. He happily opened his locked toolbox and pulled out a complex blueprint reserved for master craftsmen. Seeing my confusion over the dense sectional views and annotations, he patiently broke down each symbol, explaining the internal structures, surface finish requirements, and geometric tolerances step by step. Time flew by, and when my master checked the wall clock, he realized nearly 2 hours had passed. Leaving me to review the drawings, he headed straight to the factory office to finalize my promotion to a full-time employee. My master went directly to factory director Zhang Jianshe's office to apply for my early promotion to a full-time employee. When the director hesitated, because I had only been an apprentice for 2 years, my master confidently declared that my skills had already reached the intermediate worker standard, inviting him to inspect my work in person. The director arrived at the workshop, where I handed him 2 finished parts I had processed that day. To maintain objectivity, he invited a senior master named Master Zhang and surrounding workers to inspect them. Both declared my parts to be excellent. Just as Director Zhang was about to approve my promotion, Jia Dongshu shouted sarcastically from the crowd, accusing my master of making the parts for me. Seeing Yi Zhonghai nod in subtle approval, a confident Jia Dongshu demanded that I prove my skills on the spot. To settle rumors and protect our reputation, Director Zhang agreed to an on-site demonstration and randomly selected an intermediate worker part from the pile. I took the part and asked for 40 minutes. While Jia Dongshu sneered and waited for me to fail, I focused completely on operating the machine. 40 minutes later, I handed the finished part to Director Zhang. He carefully measured it with calipers, praising its perfect dimensions and high-quality finish. Stubbornly refusing to accept reality, Jia Dongshu claimed I must have secretly practiced that specific part beforehand. Seeing his relentless accusations, I stepped forward and challenged him directly. I told him to personally select any intermediate worker part for me to process. If I succeeded, he would have to kneel and publicly apologize to my master, the director, and me in front of the entire workshop. If I failed, I would give him 3 months of my salary. Bloodshot with anger, Jia Dongshu agreed to the bet, and Director Zhang ordered the immediate showdown to resolve the matter once and for all. Faced with the selection baskets, Jia Dongshu hesitated for a long time under pressure from the impatient workers. Finally, he steeled himself and chose the most complex semi-finished product available, a sleeve featuring multiple layers of internal stepped holes. This part was notoriously difficult, typically reserved for the most experienced intermediate workers to practice on. The surrounding master craftsmen gasped at his choice, recognizing that Jia Dongshu was deliberately trying to sabotage me. Addressing him directly, I cold-heartedly called out his jealousy in front of everyone. Jia Dongshu's face burned with embarrassment, but he stubbornly insisted that his choice fell within the rules and dared me to proceed. I took a deep breath to calm my mind, recalling the foundational principles my master had previously taught me about this specific component. As I studied the blueprints, Jia Dongshu tried to distract me by coughing loudly and tauntingly offering to let me surrender. Director Zhang sternly warned him to stop interfering. Ignoring his desperate antics, I carefully organized my tools and measurements. With complete focus, my hands operated with steady precision, aided by the mental visualization of the components, blueprints, and dimensions. The surrounding workers watched in awe as I expertly filed and polished the piece. After completing the part, I presented it for inspection. Director Zhang and several neutral master craftsmen meticulously measured every dimension with calipers, declaring it a fully qualified product that met the intermediate worker standard. Hearing the collective praise, my master smiled with relief and pride. Pale and completely defeated, Jia Dongshu dropped to his knees before I could even demand his apology. He quickly yelled out a brief apology to Director Zhang and my master, deliberately omitting me, and fled the workshop like a disgraced dog. Director Zhang patted my shoulder with great satisfaction, officially appointing me as an intermediate worker. Standing in the crowd, Yi Zhonghai frowned in deep suspicion, wondering how my skills had suddenly improved so dramatically after being beaten. Following my promotion to intermediate worker, my salary increase took effect immediately. Counting on my fingers, I realized my income would double starting in just 5 days. My master, Chen Yuanhai, told me to focus on finishing our current batch of parts before heading home. 2 days later, with the weekend approaching, matchmaker Qian visited our home. My mother, Wang Xiulan, welcomed her in and instructed me to serve tea and peanuts before sending me out to the courtyard, as marriage arrangements were handled by elders. Matchmaker Qian reported that she had located Qin Huairu in the village next to her own family's. My mother promised her a generous matchmaking bonus and agreed to take a day off over the weekend so the young couple could meet. She planned to buy meat and vegetables for a good meal, which delighted matchmaker Qian. After stuffing her pockets with peanuts, matchmaker Qian took her leave, planning to visit Qin family village the following day. However, matchmaker Qian was also trying to arrange another match for the Jia family. The other girl had a bizarre requirement. She wanted a filial, employed husband whose father had already passed away. Finding Jia Zhangxi sewing shoe soles outside, matchmaker Qian excitedly offered to share good news. Delighted by the prospect of saving money, Jia Zhangxi dragged her inside. Shortly after, a loud roar erupted from the Jia house while I was playing in the yard with Sha Zhu and Yan Jicheng. Matchmaker Qian was shoved out the door, stumbling as Jia Zhangxi chased her with a broom. Outraged by the odd request involving a father-in-law, Jia Zhangxi sat on the ground and began wailing for her late husband, accusing matchmaker Qian of insulting her family. Matchmaker Qian defended herself, arguing it was just a proposal that could be politely declined. Realizing the crowd's reaction, matchmaker Qian backed away angrily. For once, I actually sided with Jia Zhangxi, thinking no city man with a stable job would accept such an arrangement. Hearing the commotion in the courtyard, Yi Zhonghai and Jia Dongshu returned to see Jia Zhangji wailing on the ground. She dramatically claimed that someone was trying to ruin her reputation as a widow. Taking on a patriarchal role, Yi Zhonghai sternly accused matchmaker Qian of coming into the courtyard to bully orphans and widows. Matchmaker Qian stood her ground, firing back at his overbearing attitude. When Yi Zhonghai threatened to report her to the police station, I stepped forward to call him out for passing judgment without an investigation. My mother, Wang Shulan, also stepped in to defend matchmaker Qian so that our upcoming matchmaking plans would not be disrupted. Refusing to back down, matchmaker Qian clearly explained the proposal to the crowd. She had met a filial girl from a nearby alley whose mother had passed away. The girl's family owned a spacious courtyard and only required a future husband who would be filial to her father. Matchmaker Qian had simply suggested that if their future home became too small for children, the couple and Jia Zhangxi could move into the girl's larger house. Hearing this, Jia Zhangxi leaped up, accusing matchmaker Qian of trying to turn Dongshu into a live-in son-in-law and end the Jia family line. I noticed a subtle look of longing on Jia Dongshu's face and playfully taunted the family, asking if Dongshu himself might actually be willing to move. Jia Dongshu's face flushed as he loudly denied it, while Jia Zhangxi flew into a rage, viciously cursing me for trying to ruin her family. My mother's fierce protective instincts flared up instantly. Seeing her roll up her sleeves and charge forward, a terrified Jia Zhangxi scrambled into her house, locked the door, and screamed that she would hang herself if Dongshu ever agreed to such a match. Inside, Jia Dongshu silently resented his mother for being so short-sighted and ruining a golden opportunity to gain a wealthy family's property. After the crowd dispersed from the argument with matchmaker Qian, I pulled my mother back to our room so we could rest before work the next day. Before dawn, I woke up early and washed my wet shorts, hanging them outside on the clothesline. Knowing my young age, high energy, and lack of nightly entertainment, I felt a bit embarrassed, but there was nothing I could do about it. Unable to fall back asleep, I got out of bed, lit the kitchen stove, and steamed last night's leftover buns. By the firelight, I brought out an old copy of elementary Chinese language, left by my late father to study traditional Chinese characters. As the parts I processed grew more complex, I realized that reading annotations on technical drawings required better literacy. Although studying traditional characters made me yawn, I pushed through a few pages. Soon after, my mother came outside and expressed utter disbelief at seeing me reading a book. I explained that my new status as an intermediate worker required me to read complex blueprints and learn more characters. Proud of my maturity, my mother took over the cooking and reheated our morning porridge. When I retrieved my half-dry shorts to hang them inside my window, I leaned in to check if they were clean, only to open my eyes and find Yan Jiacheng staring at me through the glass. To cover up my awkwardness, I struck first and pushed open the window, accusing him of peeking into my room to steal clothes. Confused and anxious, young Yan Jicheng stumbled over his words and swore he was just casually looking at a shadow. Taking advantage of his innocence, I explained away my action as taking a deep breath of fresh morning air and gave him a gentle warning about respecting neighbors' privacy. Naive and relieved, he thanked me for the advice and quickly ran home. Soon after, my mother called me out for breakfast as the entire courtyard slowly came to life. All morning, I was somewhat distracted at work, but fortunately, I made no mistakes on the simple intermediate worker parts. In the afternoon, my master Chen Yuanhai noticed my off-state and stopped me from taking another work piece. To ease his worry, I claimed I was just tired from waking up early. My master saw through my excuse and warned me that losing focus could lead to severe hand injuries. Seeing that I took his words seriously, he kindly pointed me to the small room set aside for overtime breaks and told me to rest for 2 hours. After work, I walked out with my master feeling fully recharged. He teasingly asked if I was too excited about meeting a potential wife to sleep. A bit embarrassed, I realized he must have heard about matchmaker Qian's visit from our neighbors. My master warmly reminded me that as a grown man, I needed to take responsibility for my future family, and I solemnly agreed. Leaving the factory, I decided to buy new clothes and high-end items to show off my financial strength for tomorrow's meeting. Visiting a local clothing store, I found mostly gray and black workwear or zhongshan suits. I tried on a stylish Sarge blend zhongshan jacket, which the shopkeeper praised highly. She priced it at 150,000 old currency notes. Although it cost nearly half a month's wages, I bought it right away, knowing the shopkeeper considered it a high-end item. Touching my lightened inner pocket, I reflected on my past apprentice budget, where most of my earnings went to food, cigarettes, treats, and savings for my mother. However, knowing my new intermediate worker position would soon pay me a higher monthly salary of 400,000, I felt immensely relieved and excited about my future earnings. Afterwards, I spent another 30,000 on a fancy snack box at a grocery store, leaving myself with just 1,000 yuan bill. Feeling satisfied that I had made enough grand, face-saving preparations for the match, I happily made my way home. When I proudly showed off my new clothes at home, my mother, Wang Xiulan, smacked the back of my head and scolded me for being a spendthrift. Buying custom fabric would have been half the cost, but I was simply used to buying ready-made clothes. Heartbroken over my wasted money, my mother offered to give me extra cash so I would have spending money for my upcoming meeting. We then finished a hearty meal of porridge and mixed flour steamed buns. Abandoning the idea of visiting a murky public bathhouse, I took a wooden basin to the middle courtyard tapped to wipe myself down. When Jia Dongshu arrived with his basin and snorted at me, I stared back, looked at him up and down, and made a disgusted tiske sound while remarking on the back of his head before walking off. Leaving him confused and anxious, he ran straight home to have his mother check his head. At dawn the next morning, my mother woke me up at 7 o'clock. She gave me 50,000 yuan and sent me to the vegetable market to buy fresh meat for the 10 o'clock meeting with matchmaker Qian and Qin Huairu. Taking bus number 11, I walked to the largest nearby market, which was packed with shoppers. I pointed to a piece of pork belly and asked the butcher for the price. Suddenly, an older woman stepped in, handed over her money, and bought the whole piece. Outraged by her cutting in line, I was about to confront her when I noticed a short gun handle sticking out of her basket. I immediately swallowed my anger and waited quietly until she left. After she walked away, the butcher pulled out half a pig from beneath the counter. Looking at the meat, I asked for 10 pounds of the fat section and 2 pounds of lean meat, making sure we had plenty of fresh pork for our guests. When my mother inspected the fresh meat I brought back from the market, she was thrilled with the juicy fat piece, but frowned at the lean piece. I assured her that separating them saved us the trouble of cutting, and she accepted it. She told me to rest, muttering that with our family's good conditions and my new clothes, any sensible girl would like us. Dressed in my new zhongshan suit, I soon heard matchmaker Qian and my mother greeting each other outside. I smoothed my buzz cut and stepped out to greet them. Matchmaker Qian was accompanied by a young woman wearing a large floral jacket. Seeing her big bottom, my mother nodded with great satisfaction, thinking it was a sign of strong fertility for our family line. After everyone sat down, I brought out the expensive pastries I had bought. My mother offered pieces to matchmaker Qin Huairu, telling Qin Huairu to make herself at home, which made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Looking closely at her, I saw a young, gentle face full of youthful collagen and expressive peach blossom eyes. Although I reflected on the complexities of marrying a beautiful wife, I felt confident that our stable life in the city would keep us secure. I composed myself and formally greeted her as Comrade Qin Huairu. Delighted and slightly shy to be addressed so formally, she returned the greeting. My mother and matchmaker Qian exchanged pleased smiles and quietly stepped out to the kitchen to give us privacy. Noticing her nervous silence, I poured her a cup of warm water and assured her that I was happy to meet her. When she asked if I was an apprentice at the steel rolling mill, I teased her by saying I was not an apprentice. Seeing her flustered expression, I quickly clarified that I was an official intermediate worker at the Liu Clan rolling steel mill. She stared at me in wide-eyed surprise, and looking into her affectionate eyes, I truly understood her incredible charm. Seeing Qin Huairu's deep admiration after learning I was an official intermediate worker, I felt a surge of pride. In her eyes, my status had upgraded from a simple silver nugget to a dazzling gold coin. She even began privately picturing our future together, suddenly blurting out that she wanted to give birth to 5 children. The realization made her entire face turn bright red with embarrassment as she lowered her head. To ease the awkwardness, I suggested going for a walk before dinner. She softly agreed, and I called out to my mother in the kitchen. Hearing us leave, my mother and matchmaker Qian smiled, knowing the match was practically settled. Out of modern habit, I almost reached out to hold her hand, but quickly raised my arm to scratch my head instead. Inviting her along, she chuckled softly at my clumsy cover-up and followed me out. As we reached the main gate, we ran right into Jia Zhangxi and Jia Dongshu. Spotting us together, Jia Dongshu glared at me with deep jealousy and anger, shouting my name through gritted teeth. Ignoring him completely, I turned to Qin Huairu and casually offered to take her to the department store to buy whatever she liked, feeling confident with the 100,000 yuan my mother had given me. Furious at being ignored, Jia Zhangxi opened her mouth to curse me, but my mother stepped out of the house and sternly confronted her. Intimidated by my mother's formidable aura, Jia Zhangxi instantly swallowed her insults. My mother told me not to waste time and to take Huairu out for her walk. Bidding my mother goodbye, I led Qin Huairu past Jia Dongshu's furious, heartbroken gaze. Behind us, a terrified Jia Zhangxi quickly dragged her distraught son back to the middle courtyard to avoid my mother's wrath. As soon as we stepped outside, Qin Huairu whispered that Jia Dongshu was rude. I laughed and explained that he was just a neighbor who was jealous of my promotion to intermediate worker. She frowned, calling him a bad guy, and suggested we ignore him. To test the waters and grow closer, she warmly addressed me as Brother Shi. Satisfied with this change, I offered to lead the way as we set off together. We walked to a small local department store, where Qin Huairu was completely amazed by the wide variety of goods. I picked a few hair ties from the shelf to hold against her hair, and her shy, sparkling eyes made my heart race. After placing the hair ties on the counter, I noticed her sneaking glances at the shelves behind the shopkeeper. To give her time to browse, I asked the shopkeeper for a pound of fruit candies and 2 pounds of pastries, including sponge cake and peach shortbread. Although she repeatedly tried to decline out of politeness, I proudly told her that as an intermediate worker, I could easily afford it and wanted her to bring the treats home for her parents. Though she claimed she didn't want anything else, I followed her gaze and realized she was eyeing a tin of Pechuan vanishing cream. I paid the shopkeeper 11,000 old currency notes and handed her the hair ties, playfully threatening to throw them away if she didn't take them. She laughed and put them in her pocket, then accepted the packages of pastries and candies. I unwrapped a piece of fruit candy and popped it directly into her mouth. She gasped and quickly looked around, breathing a sigh of relief when she saw no one watching. Smiling happily as she enjoyed the sweet flavor, she softly asked me not to do that in public next time, though she clearly appreciated my assertive nature. Afterwards, our connection felt noticeably deeper, and we happily headed toward Shichihai to continue our date. While walking along the river path with Qin Huairu, I spotted Yan Bugui carrying a bucket of fish. When he slipped and fell into the mud, losing his bucket to the river, I pulled him to safety, offered a quick word of comfort, and led Qin Huairu away before he could dwell on his loss. Back home for lunch, my mother treated us to a lavish meal featuring 3 pure meat dishes, which thoroughly satisfied matchmaker Qian. Midway through, I stepped outside to give my mother and Qin Huairu private time to build a bond. Around 2 in the afternoon, I volunteered to walk Qin Huairu to the bus station, while matchmaker Qian headed home. At the station, I took the tin of Pechuan vanishing cream from my pocket and pressed it into Qin Huairu's hands. Blushing, she tried to decline such an expensive gift. But I adopted a stern, domineering tone, asking if she had taken a liking to me or not. Flustered, she softly admitted she had, but worried about how much I had already spent. I cut her off gently, declaring that since we had chosen each other, we were family now, and firmly told her to be good and listen to me. Touched by my decisiveness, she looked up with tears in her eyes and softly promised to be good. When the bus arrived, the ticket seller jokingly teased her for being so shy. As Qin Huairu boarded, she tried to pay her own fare, but I stopped her with those same 3 words, instantly calming her down. I paid the ticket seller 1,800 old currency notes for her trip toward Qin Family Village. As the bus started moving, Qin Huairu pressed against the window, staring longingly at me. I shouted that I would visit her village next week during my day off, and she vigorously nodded, promising to wait for me. Watching the bus drive away into the rising dust, I smiled warmly, feeling genuinely happy about my future with this gentle and devoted girl. As soon as I stepped back into the courtyard, I felt an inexplicable chill on the back of my neck. Turning around, I caught a glimpse of Jia Dongshu quickly hiding his head near the middle courtyard moon gate. Knowing that sneaky bastard was up to no good, I made a mental note to watch out for him. When I entered my mother's room, I found her sitting on the kang, gently stroking an old photo frame of my late father, with tear-stained eyes. Seeing me, she quickly composed herself and went back to her usual fierce blacksmith demeanor. I smiled and told her I planned to visit Qin Huairu on my next day off to finalize things. Thrilled by the news, my mother immediately started planning a grand wedding, suggesting we buy a bicycle, a sewing machine, a radio, a watch, and brand new furniture. Realizing she was getting carried away and spending too much of our savings, I quickly stopped her. I reasoned that we should only buy practical items like a bicycle, a sewing machine, and a sturdy new bed for now, leaving the rest for later as I earned more money. Curious about our living space, I asked my mother if our house was officially our own property. She confirmed that my late father had bought it legally from the old lady in the backyard during the chaotic early days. She revealed that other families in the courtyard, including the Yans, Jias, Yis, and Hez, had also bought their houses from the same old lady. Later, when the old lady returned with her capitalist son, she even tried to reclaim the properties, but failed after her son got into trouble. My mother nervously warned me to keep this quiet, to avoid unnecessary trouble, and assured me that our land title was properly registered with the Military Control Commission. Heading back to my room for a dinner of warm porridge, I looked around our cramped 3-room space and began thinking about our future. Realizing how small it would be if we had children down the road, I secretly set my sights on Hiyuju's much larger main house in the middle courtyard, admiring just how capable He Daqing had been to secure such a great spot. Dismissing my wicked thoughts about taking over Hiyuju's house, I focused on my own living space instead. Looking at the wall next to my bed, I realized that if we could acquire the outer side building and convert our built-in kitchen into a room, we could expand our space. However, since the neighbor living in the side building was a regular worker, moving them out was unlikely. As for the dark, damp room behind our kitchen, it required too much repair money. Realizing housing in Beijing was not yet at its tightest and that I was low on funds, I decided to save money for a few months before reconsidering expansion. Meanwhile, dozens of miles away, I arrived back at the entrance of Qin Family Village carrying my packages. Avoiding the village gossips, I ran straight to my yard, where my mother was feeding the chickens and grumbling about them. not laying eggs, a subtle hint pressuring my second sister-in-law, who had been married for 2 years without children. Seeing the generous gifts I brought back from the city, my second sister-in-law was delighted, realizing that a city brother-in-law would bring financial stability to the family and allow her to have a baby sooner. Inside, my mother eagerly asked how the blind date went. When my second sister-in-law teased me about calling him Brother Stone, I blushed shyly. I proudly revealed that Brother Stone was not a mere apprentice, but a full-fledged intermediate worker. My mother and second sister-in-law were shocked. Knowing how vast the income gap was between an apprentice and an intermediate worker, my mother found it hard to believe that such an outstanding young talent in the city would choose a country girl. She openly questioned if Brother Stone had a hidden illness or was a widower. I quickly defended him, assuring her that he was a 22-year-old fitter who was strong and healthy. Still suspicious, my mother bluntly asked why an educated city worker would pick me over city girls with jobs, teasingly asking if he was after my big butt or my rough hands, leaving me completely speechless. My mother admitted she had only downplayed Brother Stone earlier to keep me humble and asked eagerly when he would propose. Outside the door, my father knocked with his pipe, grumbling about rushing things. My mother argued that we should seize such an outstanding prospective son-in-law, while my father again tried to suggest Liu Nung from the neighboring village. Fed up with his nagging, I quickly defended Brother Stone and brought out the treats he had bought me. Unwrapping the sponge cakes, peach shortbread, and candies, I proudly revealed that they cost over 10,000 old currency notes. My parents and second sister-in-law were stunned by this generous display of wealth. I then gave my mother 3 hair ties. Brother Stone had bought me, keeping 2 for myself. Next, I pulled out the tin of Pequon vanishing cream. My second sister-in-law excitedly recognized it as face cream and begged to try a tiny dab. I reluctantly let her use a bit. When my father scoffed that clam oil was far cheaper, my second sister-in-law explained that this small tin cost 6,000. My father grumbled about the excessive cost, asking if women's faces were as tough as buttocks, which instantly earned him furious glares from all 3 of us women. When my father started praising Liu Nung again, my mother snapped and launched into a fierce rebuke. She called Liu Nung a spineless coward who handed his money to his brother, warning that marrying him would leave me childless. When my father tried to argue, my mother revealed that the small bag of grain he had secretly given Liu Nung yesterday was immediately taken by Liu Nung's underling to give to a girlfriend, leaving Liu Nung too terrified to utter a single word. Seeing my father still muttering under his breath about Liu Nung's supposed kindness, my mother scolded him for being muddle-headed and told him not to interfere. Realizing Liu Nung was indeed unsuitable, my father finally kept quiet. I quickly offered my mother a piece of candy to soothe her anger, then shared the rest with my father and second sister-in-law. My father popped the candy into his mouth, its delicious sweetness instantly changing his mind. He realized that having a generous, capable son-in-law would benefit the whole family, completely abandoning his preference for Liu Nung. After applying a tiny dab of face cream to my mother's face, she marveled at how smooth it felt compared to cheap clam oil. My father secretly grabbed a piece of candy for his eldest grandson, and no one objected since he was the head of the household. I then suddenly remembered and mentioned that Brother Stone planned to visit our home on his next day off. My mother gasped and tapped my forehead, exasperated that I had delayed sharing such important news. Knowing factory workers get 1 day off every 6 days, she declared that we needed to prepare properly to make a great impression. She decisively resolved to slaughter our non-laying old hen, an impressive move that delighted my second sister-in-law. My mother also instructed my father to catch fish from the river and planned to serve cured pork, white radishes, and white wine. When my mother asked what I had eaten at the Zhao house for lunch, I recalled the feast of meatballs, braised pork, braised fish, stir-fried cabbage with pork, shredded pork in sweet bean sauce, and white steamed buns. Hearing this, the entire room fell dead silent, everyone swallowing their saliva in awe. Realizing how lavishly the Zhao family had treated me, my mother knew we had to put our best foot forward with a hearty spread of stewed fish and cured pork with mushrooms. Watching them plan, my second sister-in-law secretly rejoiced, eager for another delicious meal, and thrilled to have such a wealthy city brother-in-law. Early in the morning, Yan Bugui stopped me to ask if the girl yesterday was my blind date. I proudly confirmed it. He then mentioned he was planning to become a primary school teacher since renting out his storefront no longer covered his growing family expenses. He boasted that he had passed a rigorous assessment, where only 10 out of over 100 candidates were accepted. Appreciating his effort despite the high illiteracy rate of the era, I praised his accomplishment before he happily left to register at the school. I went to the middle courtyard water tap to wash up and brush my teeth with salt. Jia Dongshu walked out, saw my toothbrush, and scoffed at me for being pretentious. But I ignored him. Meanwhile, Jia Dongshu simply used his salt-covered finger to rub his mouth directly. Just then, He Daching stepped out of his house in high spirits. I greeted him politely, and he complimented me on my growing maturity. To spite Jia Dongshu, I proudly brought up that I was now an official, full-time employee. He Daching remarked that 3 years passed quickly, and assumed Jia Dongshu had become one too since they joined together. I smiled without answering, while Jia Dongshu's face turned dark and sullen. Noticing the obvious friction between us, He Daching made a quick excuse and left. After I finished washing up and walked away, Yi Zhonghai appeared to comfort a disappointed Jia Dongshu, encouraging him to practice more to pass his assessment. At 39, Yi Zhonghai had given up hope of having his own children due to his wife's health issues and was actively looking for a disciple to rely on in his old age. He had previously considered me, but held a grudge ever since my master Chen Yuanhai took me in as an apprentice before he could. Unaware of Yi Zhonghai's secret resentment, I simply went about my day, leaving Jia Dongshu to deal with his own shortcomings. I remembered clearly how Yi Zhonghai tried to take advantage of me when I first started at the factory. My mother and I had visited him with gifts, asking him as an elder to watch over me in the same workshop where my late father worked. He pretended to be friendly, but privately demanded 5 years of my entire salary as tuition to mentor me. Disgusted by his greed, I refused outright. Instead, my mother and I turned to my father's other close friend, Chen Yuanhai, who willingly took me on as his apprentice. Resentful of my refusal, Yi Zhonghai tried to bully me on my first day by ordering me to do heavy labor outside my job duties. When my master, Chen Yuanhai, saw him picking on me, he cursed Yi Zhonghai out directly, telling him to stay away from his apprentice. To curry favor with Yi Zhonghai, Jia Dongshu later put a sack over my head and ambushed me. Refusing to resort to dirty tricks during the current crackdown, I decided to take my revenge by systematically taking away everything Jia Dongshu wanted, starting with snatching Qin Huairu. As a new month began, my name was officially displayed on my own workbench as an intermediate worker, and I began taking on factory tasks independently. My master, Chen Yuanhai, had just taken on a new apprentice named Yue Peng. Unlike Yi Zhonghai, who refused to let his past apprentices graduate until they quit the factory, my master believed in truly guiding new workers. Leaving for an important assignment, my master asked me to guide Yue Peng for the day. I pulled my honest junior brother aside to share my experience, reminding him to stay attentive and keep my master's teacup filled. Seeing his struggle to keep up over his first few days, I handed him my personal notebook filled with detailed processing notes and single-character annotations. Deeply grateful, Yue Peng thanked me repeatedly, admitting he had been anxious about failing to assist our master properly. I waved off his formalities, reminding him that we were fellow disciples, and told him to start studying the first page right away so he could get up to speed. Noticing my master take 2 big gulps of water and place his cup down with a crisp sound, I signaled my junior brother, Yue Peng, to check my notes. Flipping to the first page, Yue Peng was amazed by my note on sound localization, giving me a thumbs up. I reminded him that observation was key to keeping our master comfortable, silently contrasting my generous master with the selfish Yi Zhonghai. Noticing Yi Zhonghai staring at me, I glared right back, confident in my official position. Yue Peng eagerly asked if I had any secrets to becoming an intermediate worker in just 2.5 years. I patted his shoulder, advising him to build a solid foundation rather than rush, since manual fitting required steady eye-hand coordination. My quick promotion had made the other apprentices restless, but it had also forced Jia Dongshu to realize his own shortcomings and seek advice from Yi Zhonghai. At noon, I walked to the cafeteria with my master. Yue Peng had already fetched our 6 lunchboxes, making me joke about enjoying my master's good fortune. Refusing to let his apprentice pay, my master insisted on giving Yue Peng money in advance. Opening my lunchbox, I praised the unusually large pork chunks. Yue Peng admitted the cafeteria staff recognized my lunchbox from my notes and gave us better portions. After washing our lunchboxes, I stayed behind with Yue Peng to chat with the cafeteria staff. I introduced Yue Peng to Chef Yang, offering him a cigarette and praising his cooking skills. Soon, Master Ma joined us, accepting a cigarette from Yue Peng as well. As we chatted, both chefs offered to introduce me to potential marriage prospects, including a square-faced niece and a pretty neighbor's daughter. I smiled, handed them candies, and politely explained that I had already found someone. I asked if I could rely on them to cook for my upcoming wedding banquet instead. Master Yang expressed mild disappointment, but Master Ma laughed and promised to help out whenever I called. Standing beside me, Yue Peng listened intently, his eyes darting with clever interest as he learned my brother already had a partner. After finishing work in the afternoon, I said a quick word to my master, Chen Yuanhai, and hurriedly ran out of the factory. Seeing my energetic exit, my master chuckled, happy that I was finally settling down to start a family. I ran straight to the department store in Beijing to buy a bicycle. Guided politely by a teller, I walked over to the bicycle counter, where 3 or 4 shiny new bicycles were parked in a row. I called out to the sleepy middle-aged woman working at the counter, and she enthusiastically began explaining the available options. She compared the 2 brands in stock, Flying Pigeon and Forever. She explained that Flying Pigeon was lightweight, agile, and stylish, while Forever was sturdy, heavy-duty, and extremely durable, equipped with a full chain cover to keep out mud and dust. Since I would need to carry heavy loads and transport Qin Huairu on long trips to Qin Family Village, I favored the durable Forever model. When I asked for the prices, she quoted 900,000 old currency notes for the Flying Pigeon and 1.8 million for the Forever. She openly explained that she was charging a small premium using her connections as the store manager's wife, as the standard price for a Forever bicycle was 1.6 million. Appreciating her honesty and seeing her wearing an expensive watch, I readily handed over the 1.8 million yuan. She issued me a 1.6 million receipt for license plate registration and generously threw in a headlight, taillight, and front basket for free. Thrilled with my purchase, I thanked her warmly, took my new Forever bicycle, and prepared to head home. After leaving the bicycle counter, I realized the other counters were closing up, so I decided to return for the sewing machine another day. Outside, I mounted my new bicycle and pedaled comfortably. On my way home, I pulled over at a street repair stall to get a headlight and front basket installed. Although I had my own tools, I paid 1,000 yuan to use the repairman's drill, ensuring a smooth, precise hole that would not ruin my brand new bike. The repairman quickly drilled the holes and smoothed out the edges with impressive skill. Handing him a cigarette, I thanked him warmly, rang my bell, and rode off. As I arrived at Luogu Lane, a chubby-faced young man called out, asking for a ride. It was He Yuzhu. Surprised to see him away from the restaurant during work hours, I asked what brought him back. He hopped on the back and explained that his father, He Daqing, was helping out at his master's restaurant, giving him free time to cook dinner for his younger sister, Yu Shui. I asked why he was still an apprentice after 3 years. I recalled how He Daqing used to chase him with an iron ladle after his mother passed away, forcing a 10-year-old child to cook delicious meals and calling him Sha Zhu, a nickname that eventually stuck in our courtyard. He Yuzhu clarified that he had spent the first 2 years doing odd jobs and practicing basic knife skills under his father's supervision. He had only formally started his culinary apprenticeship this year. I realized his current master was likely just a fellow craftsman exchanging favors with He Daqing, which explained why He Yuzhu faced such tough times later when his father ran away. When we arrived at the courtyard, He Yuzhu hopped off and thoughtfully lifted the rear wheel of my bicycle to help me park, a small, kind gesture that I deeply appreciated. When I pushed my new bicycle into the courtyard alongside He Yuzhu, neighbors quickly gathered around to admire it. Ren Weifeng guessed it cost over $1 million, while Aunt Li and Liu Haizhong marveled at the quality of the steel. I shifted the focus to Liu Haizhong, who admitted he could not justify buying one with 3 sons to support. Suddenly, Jia Zhangxi scoffed from outside the crowd, accusing my mother and me of being spendthrifts who squandered my late father's pension. Before my mother could lose her temper, I stepped in and calmly addressed the neighbors. I explained that we had originally planned to hand out candies to celebrate our new purchase, but Jia Zhangxi's harsh words ruined it. Seeing the disappointed neighborhood children glare at her, I pushed my bicycle inside, leaving the courtyard angry at Jia Zhangxi for ruining their free treats. That very evening, an angry child threw a rock and smashed a window at the Jia home. When Jia Zhangxi ran into the yard, late at night, screaming and cursing, several short-tempered men shouted her down and ordered her to go back to sleep. Yi Zhonghai initially wanted to step in and redirect the blame toward my family, but his wife, Li Chui, quickly pulled him back. She explained how Jia Zhangxi had managed to offend the entire neighborhood that afternoon, warning him that the parents would fiercely protect whichever child broke the window. Realizing how cleverly I had turned the courtyard against Jia Zhangxi, Yi Zhonghai decided not to get involved. Regretting that they had no children of their own to rely on, he sat down with a bottle of liquor, while Li Cui quietly heated up peanuts to comfort him. After the window-smashing incident at the Jia home quieted down, my day off finally arrived. Before I left, my mother warned me to stay on the main roads and handed me a small item wrapped in a tattered cloth. Opening it, I trembled to find a real handgun that my late father had given us years ago. Reassured by this self-defense weapon, I set off on my new bicycle to pick up matchmaker Qian. Since pedaling all the way to Changping would be exhausting, matchmaker Qian suggested we take the bus instead. The driver helped tie my bicycle securely to the vehicle, and after a 3-hour bus ride, we arrived at the final stop. From there, matchmaker Qian took an ox cart, while I pedaled along the bumpy dirt road for another half-hour until we reached Qin family village. As we walked into the village, a few local women, gossiping at the entrance, stared in awe at my new bicycle. One old woman even tried to suggest her young granddaughter for a match, but matchmaker Qian scoffed at her absurd idea and quickly pulled me away. Soon, matchmaker Qian led me to the Qin family home. Having watched for my arrival through the low yard wall, Qin Huairu had quickly called her mother out to greet us. Mrs. Qin Lin welcomed us warmly, showering me with enthusiastic compliments. Stepping into the courtyard, I unloaded the gifts of snacks and fruits from my handlebars and politely greeted her. Mrs. Qin Lin beamed with joy, calling for her second daughter-in-law to bring us water. Qin Huairu handed me a bowl, and I took it with both hands, softly thanking her as our eyes met. Inside the Qin family home, Mrs. Qin Lin called out her husband to meet me. I immediately pulled out filter cigarettes to offer him, which deeply impressed him since filtered cigarettes were considered a luxury item. Soon, Qin Huairu's elder brothers, Qin Yu and Qin Ma, arrived. I offered them filter cigarettes as well, and the 4 of us squatted near the doorway to smoke and chat. Her father carefully tucked the filter cigarette behind his ear to save it, smoking his old pipe instead. When they asked where I worked, I mentioned I was a fitter at the Lu Clan rolling steel mill. Qin Ma remembered seeing the factory's massive chimney and praised how reliable old state factories were. Soon, mouth-watering aromas drifted from the kitchen. Mrs. Qin Lin called her sons to set up a table outdoors, insisting on preparing a proper feast of stewed chicken, cured meat, and mushrooms. Inside, matchmaker Qian teased a blushing Qin Huairu for sneaking glances at me from the doorway. We sat down in the courtyard for a rich meal. Her father invited me to take the seat of honor, and Mrs. Qin Lin placed a chicken leg on my plate. During lunch, her father mentioned how difficult it was to fix broken farm tools. I offered to bring over some factory iron scraps next time to help them forge sturdier tools, which made her family appreciate me even more. After lunch, Qin Huairu cleared the table and gently stopped me from helping, softly saying it was women's work. Her brothers went off to check the fields, her father dozed off against the wall, and matchmaker Qian pulled Mrs. Qin Lin inside to chat privately. Seeing Qin Huairu hanging clothes to dry in the quiet courtyard, I walked over to help carry the wooden basin. She looked up and smiled, her eyes curving into crescent moons with shallow dimples. As we sat side by side, I reflected on the long commute between the city and Changping, a round trip taking 10 hours on today's bumpy roads. Realizing that long-distance visits were too impractical, I decided not to dawdle any longer and lay all my intentions out on the table. Looking directly into Qin Huairu's eyes, I asked her solemnly if she would marry me. Without hesitation, she looked back at me and softly said she would. Delighted by her clear and sweet response, I told her I would bring my mother over soon to formally propose. She nodded shyly, blushing as she promised to wait for me. With our intentions set, we took a stroll through the village together. Addressing me as Brother Stone, she asked if her rural background would embarrass me in the city. I reassured her completely, telling her that city homes were smaller than her yard, and that my mother had already prepared new furniture. I promised to stand up for her, take care of our home, and teach her anything she needed to learn. Touched by my reassuring words, she smiled warmly and promised to handle all our household logistics dutifully. When we returned to the Qin compound, her father, mother, and matchmaker Qian were waiting inside. I stepped forward and declared in front of everyone that Huairu and I were aligned, and that my mother would come over in a few days to follow proper proposal etiquette. Overjoyed, her father slapped his thigh and declared he was thrilled to entrust his daughter to a reliable man like me. Matchmaker Qian chimed in to congratulate the family, while Mrs. Qin Lin tearfully held Huairu's hand and asked me to take good care of her in the city, which I solemnly promised to do. That evening, I stayed at the Qin home for dinner and drank sweet potato liquor with her father and brother to celebrate our engagement. Mrs. Qin Lin prepared a clean, sun-dried bed for me in the best room. Lying on the warm kong, I listened to the crickets outside and felt a deep, genuine connection to this new life and my future family. In the neighboring room, Qin Huairu snuggled close to her mother, happily confessing how much she liked me, while her mother gently advised her to be diligent, filial, and devoted to her new life in the city. The next morning, Mrs. Qin Lin packed over a dozen boiled eggs for me to eat on my journey back to the city. Before I left, Qin Huairu walked me to the old locust tree at the village entrance. I told her to wait for my message, and she gave me a hand-stitched cloth insole embroidered with the word peace in red thread. Touched by her sincere gift, I mounted my bicycle and rode off through the morning mist, seeing her wave goodbye beneath the tree as matchmaker Qian sat on the back seat. After taking a bus back to the city, I safely dropped matchmaker Qian off at her compound. Since I had taken the day off, I rode my bicycle back to my neighborhood, locked it up safely at home, and headed to the alley entrance for a bowl of beef bone broth noodles. I peeled 2 of the eggs Qin Huairu's mother gave me and added them to the bowl, savoring the delicious, simple meal. Returning home, I slept soundly until around 3 in the afternoon. Waking up fully refreshed, I decided to prepare dinner for my mother before she returned from work. I hand-tore some cabbage, sliced a generous portion of cured pork, and set them to stew in an earthenware pot with lard and salt, alongside a pot of thick white porridge. When my mother, Wang Shulan, returned home tired and hungry, she was pleased to see dinner ready. Over our meal, I shyly told her that Qin Huairu and I had officially decided to get married, and that she would need to come with me to Changping in a few days to formalize the proposal. Hearing the news, my mother smiled with immense relief, overjoyed that I was finally settling down to start a family of my own. When I arrived at the workshop the next day, my master, Chen Yuanhai, asked about my marriage plans. I happily reported that everything was settled, though the exact date was still to be decided. My junior brother, Yue Peng, offered his eager congratulations, and I lightheartedly teased him since I wasn't even married yet. As the other workers filed in, I felt a sudden chill and turned around to catch Jia Dongshu glaring at me sinisterly. Soon after, my mother returned from meeting with Mrs. Qin Lin to finalize the engagement terms. Pleased by how reasonable her family was, my mother agreed to a generous betrothal gift of 100,000 yuan, plus cloth and meat. She set the wedding date for the 6th day of next month, a scheduled day off, and suggested I ask my master to help organize the wedding procession since our family lacked young, unmarried men, and we didn't get along with Jia Dongshu. When I asked my master for help, he readily agreed and assigned Yue Peng to join my wedding party. He also offered to take me to the next workshop at noon to recruit my older fellow apprentices. When I explained that Qin Huairu was a gentle, capable country girl, my master was initially shocked that I hadn't chosen a city girl, given my good looks and job status. However, I explained that what mattered most was marrying someone I truly loved, and he thoughtfully agreed. Learning that the trip to Qin family village took 3 hours by bike and bus, my master realized the wedding procession would be far too long and grueling for a bicycle ride. Telling me to wait, he walked straight into Director Zhang's office. When Director Zhang assumed he wanted a bicycle key, my master handed it back, revealing that he actually wanted to borrow Director Zhang's 4-wheeled automobile for the wedding. Impressed by how fiercely my master looked after his apprentices, Director Zhang agreed to lend his car and even offered his own son to act as our driver on the 6th day of next month. My master, Chen Yuanhai, returned to the workshop with a bright smile, announcing that he had successfully borrowed Director Zhang's car for my wedding. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I promised to remember Director Zhang's kindness. Master explained that Director Zhang's family was once wealthy and had acquired the vehicle before facing tough times. Early on the morning of the wedding, Director Zhang's son, Zhang Zhen, arrived at our alley in a rugged, military green Jeep. I handed him 2 packs of filter cigarettes and thanked him warmly. Joined by my master's senior apprentice and my junior brother, Yu Peng, we all climbed into the vehicle. As we rode out of the city, Yue Peng marveled at the soft seat cushions, and Zhang Zhen began sharing stories about various foreign luxury car brands. When I correctly identified names like Cadillac and Mercedes-Benz, Zhang Zhen looked at me with newfound respect. He explained that his father had originally chosen the Jeep during wartime because it was cheap, sturdy, and capable of handling rough dirt roads. As we reached the countryside, the Jeep bumped heavily along the dirt paths. Approaching Qin family village, the old women gathered under the locust tree, scattered in surprise at the sight of the roaring vehicle, mistaking it for official business. Honking the horn, Zhang Zhen drove straight to the Qin family's dirt courtyard, where dozens of relatives had gathered. Seeing the car park outside, the frightened crowd panicked at first. However, Qin Huairu's father immediately recognized me as I stepped out. Overjoyed and bursting with pride, he announced to everyone that it was his new son-in-law arriving to pick up the bride. The entire courtyard erupted in amazed chatter, marveling at the fact that Sanya's husband had brought a 4-wheeled vehicle. Recovering from his initial excitement, her father eagerly rushed out to welcome us, followed by a crowd of relatives desperate to catch a glimpse of the impressive green Jeep and the capable man behind the wheel. Inside the house, Qin Huairu eagerly asked her sister-in-law to check if I had arrived. Her sister-in-law teased her for being in a hurry to get married, and her mother soon called out for her to come outside. Looking beautiful in a clean red floral jacket, Qin Huairu blushed with excitement. Outside, I was surrounded by her relatives, who offered cigarettes and marveled at the Jeep. To follow local customs, her cousins playfully blocked the doorway, demanding opening red envelopes. Yapeng quickly handed out small envelopes filled with cash, making everyone laugh. Stepping up to the door, I announced my name and sincere intentions, while my senior brother presented our traditional gifts of shortbread, fruit jars, pork belly, and brown sugar. When the door opened, Qin Huairu and I locked eyes with shy smiles. After bowing to her parents, her mother tearfully placed her daughter's hand in mine, asking us to live a good life together. A red paper veil was placed over Qin Huairu's face, and as firecrackers popped in the yard, I helped her into the Jeep. Her parents wiped away tears as the car slowly drove out of the village. By past noon, we arrived at Luogu Lane, where the Jeep created a huge sensation among the neighbors. My master, Chen Yuanhai, greeted us warmly at the courtyard gate. Holding a red ribbon, I led Qin Huairu inside for a simplified ceremony. We bowed to Chairman Mao's portrait, my mother, and my master, then bowed to each other. When I lifted her veil, I looked into her bright, shy eyes with complete joy. We held the wedding banquet in the middle courtyard, serving hearty dishes cooked by Master Yang, including braised pork with cabbage, chicken with potatoes, scrambled eggs, and fruit candies. Everyone celebrated at the tables, showering us with toasts and warm wishes. Qin Huairu gracefully greeted our guests alongside me, earning high praise for her sensible and gentle nature as we officially began our new life together. The dim yellow light from the new kerosene lamp gently lit our small bridal chamber. Dressed in a simple shirt with her hair down, Qin Huairu sat nervously on the edge of the bed. I handed her a glass of water, and our fingers brushed briefly, sending a slight jolt through us both. Apologizing for the small size of the room, I was relieved when she softly assured me that it was tidied neatly and better than she expected. I sat down beside her, blew out the lamp, and we settled into the quiet night under the new bedding. Outside, 16-year-old Hiyuju and Jia Dongshu were squatting in the dark corner outside my window. Plotting to startle me, Jia Dongshu suddenly backed away and kicked Hiyuju hard in the groin. An agonizing scream echoed through the yard as Hiyuju collapsed. Hearing the commotion right outside, I told Qin Huairu to stay in bed, put on my clothes, and stepped out with my mother. A dark figure was lying on the ground holding his lower body. My face darkened as I realized someone had been eavesdropping outside my window. Neighbors quickly gathered with candles, and Yan Bugui recognized 16-year-old Sha Zhu lying on the ground. He Daqing pushed through the crowd in panic to check on his son, who had already fainted from excruciating pain. Looking closely, I noticed blood leaking from where Hiyuju was clutching himself and immediately alerted his father. Seeing the bleeding, I urged He Daqing to borrow a cart and get Sha Zhu to the hospital immediately. Yan Bugui took charge, telling He Daqing and Ren Weifeng to carry Sha Zhu toward the main street, while he and Liu Haizhong ran to a neighboring yard to borrow a handcart, rushing to save the boy's life. As I turned back toward my house after helping get Hiyuju off to the hospital, Yi Zhonghai stopped me with a stern, solemn look on his face. In a hypocritical, lecturing tone, he accused me of striking Sha Zhu and targeting his groin just because he was eavesdropping. Furious at the groundless accusation, I publicly cursed him out, calling him an old eunuch, and pointing out how ridiculous it was to claim I left my own bride on my wedding night to go around hitting people. The surrounding neighbors burst into laughter, completely agreeing with me. They openly poked fun at Yi Zhonghai's lack of children, which pierced his sensitive spot and turned his face pale with rage. Furious, Yi Zhonghai threatened to call the police on me tomorrow. I walked right up to him, pointed at his shoulder, and warned him that falsely accusing me without evidence was a crime. I called on the neighbors to see how malicious he was being, making everyone view him with skepticism. Satisfied with the outcome, I led my mother back into our house and shut the door on him. Inside, my hearty smile returned. I told my mother how glad I was to finally tear off Yi Zhonghai's hypocritical mask. My mother chuckled at my sharp tongue, though she warned me that Yi Zhonghai would hold an even deeper grudge now. She reassured me that as a widow, she could act as my shield whenever necessary, since society didn't expect a widow to follow strict moral standards. Grateful for her protection, I bade her good night. Returning to my room, I crawled back into bed with Qin Huairu. She rested her head on my shoulder and asked who had been hurt outside. I grumbled that the eavesdropper got what he deserved, though I was secretly relieved to prove myself better than before. Asking her gently if she was feeling all right, I held her close, and we shared a much longer, warm, and passionate, intimate time together. Outside our window, a shadowy figure stood frozen in place for a long while before glaring fiercely at the room and stiffly walking away into the night. The morning after our wedding, Qin Huairu got up early to prepare breakfast. My mother, Wang Shulin, joined her in the kitchen, pleased by her diligence. Qin Huairu respectfully asked for guidance on where the ingredients were kept and how to manage the kitchen without wasting anything. My mother warmly opened the cupboards, showed her the daily utensils, and explained where the oil, salt, and grain were kept. She guided her in making cornmeal porridge, mixed flour pancakes, and pickled vegetables, silently approving of her sensible, steady nature, and looking forward to handing over household duties to her in the future. When I woke up and saw breakfast already prepared, I grabbed a bucket to fetch water from the middle courtyard so my wife could clean up properly. While I was out, Qin Huairu shyly and carefully folded away the blood-stained square cloth from our bed. When we sat down to eat, Qin Huairu served my mother and me full bowls of porridge, but only gave herself half a bowl. Used to rural customs where women ate less to save food for disaster years, she assumed she should eat sparingly since she was not doing heavy physical labor. My mother immediately took her bowl, added 2 generous spoonfuls, and told her that our family had plenty of food. She urged her to eat well so she could give her a healthy grandson next year. I smiled as I watched them, warmly agreeing with my mother and teasing that we should aim for 2 grandsons in 3 years. I also reminded Qin Huairu that since my mother and I would be eating lunch at the factory, she must cook and eat lunch for herself at home instead of starving to save food. My mother firmly backed me up, warning Qin Huairu that she would check on her after work. I advised her to stay inside the courtyard for the day to avoid getting lost, suggesting she could chat with the neighbors except for the Jia and Yi families. My mother held her hand, promising that the 3 of us would go out together after work to buy her whatever she needed, bringing tears of gratitude to my wife's eyes as she thanked us. When I stepped into the workshop the next morning, my coworkers immediately surrounded me with warm congratulations. Smiling, I pulled out a bag of wedding candy and handed handfuls to everyone. My master, Chen Yuanhai, and junior brother Yapeng joined us, happily accepting the treats. Once the crowd dispersed, I quietly approached my master to mention that I wanted to personally thank Director Zhang for letting us borrow his car for the wedding. Approving of my gratitude, my master led me to Director Zhang's quiet, detached office. I placed a heavy canvas bag near his desk, offering my heartfelt thanks for his generosity. Before Director Zhang could decline, my master made a quick excuse, and we bowed and departed. Opening the bag, Director Zhang found a thoughtful, appropriate gift: 2 packs of cigarettes tied with red paper, 2 bottles of local liquor, 4 jars of fruit, and a large bag of assorted candies. He smiled, placing the gifts in his cabinet and appreciating my proper etiquette. At lunchtime, I visited the factory cafeteria with the remaining half bag of candy. Greeting Chef Yang and the staff, I distributed the sweets to thank them for their hard work. Deeply appreciative, Auntie Lee and the crew packed my lunchbox so full of food that the lid could barely close. Seeing my overflowing lunchbox when he arrived later, Yapeng gave me an admiring thumbs up. In the afternoon, I packed up my tools and left work early. Unbeknownst to me, back at the courtyard, a chaotic situation was already brewing as the neighborhood women gathered to point and whisper. Returning home from work with my mother on my bicycle, I noticed a huge crowd gathered at the entrance of our courtyard, craning their necks and whispering. Panic seized me, and I worried that my new bride, Qin Huairu, was being bullied by the troublemakers in the middle courtyard. Hearing my concern, my mother grabbed a heavy jujube wood rolling pin from behind the door, and the 2 of us rushed into the crowd. We squeezed through the packed moon gate, where Sun's wife from the front courtyard informed us that the Jia and He families were having a fierce fight. Relieved to learn Qin Huairu was completely safe, I spotted her standing on tiptoe near the front, watching the commotion. I handed Sun's wife a few pieces of wedding candy to take over her prime viewing spot, allowing my mother, my wife, and me to stand together at the front line. Qin Huairu shyly greeted us, admitting she had stepped out to watch the excitement while dinner warmed on the stove. My mother popped a peanut into her mouth and eagerly asked what had started the fight. Qin Huairu explained that after finishing cooking, she stepped outside for fresh air, only for Jia Zhangxi to approach her with sarcastic, hostile remarks. Before Qin Huairu could react, He Daqing arrived with a face as dark as the bottom of a pot. Without a word, he delivered a loud, hard slap straight across Jia Zhangxi's face. Qin Huairu described how He Daqing flew into a rage, raining punches and slaps on Jia Zhangxi while cursing heavily. Though Jia Zhangxi tried to fight back, she was no match for him, leaving her cheeks red and swollen like steamed buns. Looking over, I saw Jia Zhangxi cowering behind a police officer, her hair disheveled and her face badly bruised. Recalling how He Daqing used to financially assist the Jia family, I marveled at how quickly their relationship had shattered into an all-out public brawl. Recalling old courtyard rumors about Jia Zhangxi and He Daqing, I couldn't help but smack my lips. I realized Shaju's injuries must be severe for these former close neighbors to turn on each other so violently. My wife, Qin Huairu, tugged at my sleeve with intense curiosity, asking for juicy details. I squeezed her hand and whispered that we should talk privately behind closed doors later. Suddenly, the standoff in the courtyard escalated. Held back by two police officers, a bloodshot He Daqing roared at Jia Zhangxi, threatening to end the Jia family line if his own was ruined. When he violently resisted, a young officer effortlessly executed an over-the-shoulder throw, slamming He Daqing to the ground. An older officer sternly reminded He Daqing that he had no evidence proving Jia Zhangxi's son caused the injury. Unexpectedly, Jia Zhangxi jumped out from behind the officers and pointed at their noses, angrily screaming that Sha Zhu broke his own genitals and demanding they call her comrade instead of old lady. As the stunned officers momentarily loosened their grip, He Daqing broke free with a burst of strength and delivered a solid kick straight to Jia Zhangxi's chest. She rolled away like a tattered sack, quickly dodging behind the crowd while He Daqing was firmly restrained once again. Seeing the chaos, I held my wife and mother close to protect them. Just then, someone in the crowd shouted that Jia Dongshu had returned. Everyone turned to see Jia Dongshu standing at the moon gate alongside Yi Zhonghai and other workers returning from their shift. When a neighbor called out that his mother was being beaten, a terrified Jia Dongshu stepped through the gate. Taking one look at the three police officers and the enraged, bloodshot He Daqing, his self-preservation instinct kicked in. Instead of helping his mother, Jia Dongshu abruptly turned around and bolted out the moon gate as fast as he could, yelling an excuse that he was going to get help. The entire courtyard fell dead silent in utter disbelief. Neighbors immediately exploded into loud laughter and harsh criticism, calling Jia Dongshu a spineless coward, and concluding that his guilty run practically proved he was responsible for Sha Zhu's terrible injury. Furious at the criticisms directed toward her son, Jia Zhangxi turned around and launched a shrill, foul-mouthed rant at the crowd, fiercely defending Jia Dongshu. However, her vicious insults only deepened the neighbors' disgust, causing several young men to clench their fists in anger. Seeing the situation deteriorate, the senior police officer ordered everyone to disperse. As the crowd reluctantly cleared, many cast cold, vengeful glares at the Jia family's windows. I led my mother and wife back home, quietly noting that the Jia family's windows would likely be smashed again late at night by angry neighbors. As we ate dinner, we watched through our door as the police led both He Daqing and Jia Zhangxi away. Since neither refused to reconcile, the police detained them and planned to go to the steel rolling mill the next day to find Jia Dongshu. Qin Huairu eagerly asked me about the old rumors surrounding He Daqing and Jia Zhangxi, and I described what I had witnessed. Watching us chat happily, my mother felt glad to see our harmonious relationship. She then expressed concern for He Daqing's 6-year-old daughter, He Yushui. My mother recalled her past friendship with Yushui's late mother, Lin Meichin, and decided to carry a plate of food to the middle courtyard to check on the young girl. After finishing my meal, I helped clear the dishes and took a bucket to fetch water from the middle courtyard tap. There, I found my mother holding a crying, malnourished He Yushui. My mother angrily explained that the heartless He Daqing had left the frightened girl without food all day. Yushui politely greeted me, and I gently touched her thin hair, knowing that angry neighbors were likely to smash the Jia family's windows late at night. I whispered to my mother that leaving Yushui alone next door would terrify her. My mother agreed completely and took the little girl back to our home to spend the night safely with us. That night, our courtyard was far from peaceful. In the dead of night, several sharp clanging sounds echoed through the middle courtyard, followed by the terrifying crash of shattering glass. Jia Dongshu's furious, shock-filled roar rang out, demanding to know which scoundrel had smashed his window. No one answered or came out, leaving him to curse powerlessly into the cold night wind. Hearing the commotion, I pulled my wife, Qin Huairu, close into my arms. Listening to his angry cursing while holding her warm, fragrant body in bed, My sleepiness quickly vanished. Instead, a surge of energy took over, and we shared another deeply intimate, passionate moment. The next morning, the sunlight cast a cold reflection on the broken glass shards scattered on the ground. After breakfast, my mother took young He Shui back to the He family home. Before leaving, she instructed Qin Huairu to prepare an extra portion of food for Shui if the He family adults failed to return for lunch. This thoughtful arrangement ensured the malnourished girl was cared for, while subtly encouraging my thrifty wife to cook better. Nourishing meals with our cured meat instead of eating too sparingly. After everyone left for work, a sleep-deprived Jia Dongshu shuffled out of his house with dark circles under his eyes. As he reached the middle courtyard, he ran into Qin Huairu carrying an enamel basin to fetch water. Staring blankly at her through the morning light, he stood frozen with a dazed, dark expression. Realizing he was staring, Qin Huairu frowned in deep disgust, glared right back at him, spat, and slammed our door shut in his face. Auntie Li, watching nearby, loudly dismissed him as a toad trying to eat swan meat. Startled back to reality, a red-faced Jia Dongshu hurried out of the courtyard. A twisted, bitter thought flashed through his mind, wondering why such a pleasing woman didn't belong to him. Though he quickly tried to shake off the unrealistic fantasy, a dull pain and bitter envy lingered in his heart as he trudged toward the factory against the biting morning wind. As I walked toward the imposing cast-iron gate of Liu Clan Rolling Steel Mill, a sharp shout from behind suddenly called out my name. Panic seized me, and without thinking, I turned and bolted out of the factory gate. The two pursuing police officers immediately took my panicked flight as a sign of guilt. The young officer yelled for backup and gave chase. Terrified and completely exhausted, my steps turned clumsy. After taking only a few steps, I tripped and fell awkwardly forward. My face slammed hard against the rough gravel road. A sharp pain shot through me as warm blood instantly gushed from a deep gash on my forehead and broken nose. Dizzy and bleeding, I collapsed onto the ground, unable to get up. When the two officers caught up, even they were shocked by my gruesome, blood-stained appearance. The older officer squatted down and gently explained that I wasn't in trouble, nor was I going to jail. He clarified that they only needed my cooperation regarding He Yuzhu's injury, which would mostly involve dispute mediation and financial compensation. Hearing that I wouldn't face prison time as long as I paid compensation, I grabbed onto his words like a lifeline, eagerly agreeing to cooperate despite the throbbing pain all over my body. Assisted by the officers, I stood up and remembered my job. I humbly asked if I could request a day's leave from the security guards so I wouldn't lose my wages. The older officer kindly agreed and escorted me to the guardhouse. Seeing me covered in blood and flanked by police, the nervous guards initially assumed I had committed a serious crime and eagerly offered to fire me on the spot to protect the factory's reputation. The older officer quickly stopped their misunderstanding, explaining that it was just a neighborhood dispute requiring compensation and a formal leave of absence. Relieved, the guards quickly approved my leave. The officers then escorted me straight to the hospital, where He Yuzhu, He Daqing, and my mother, Jia Zhangxi, were already being treated. Since everyone involved was gathered in one place, the police planned to settle the matter right there. As the police half-helped me into He Yuzhu's hospital ward, a furious He Yuzhu glared at me from his bed, screaming that I was a heartless and treacherous wretch. Sitting nearby, my bruised and swollen mother, Jia Zhangxi, immediately jumped to my defense. Defending me with complete absurdity, she claimed I didn't do it on purpose, and that He Yuzhu was at fault for placing himself under my feet. Enraged and trembling with grief, He Yuzhu tried to sit up and argue back, but the sudden movement caused a sharp pain that made his vision go black. As He Daqing rushed to his son's bedside, his heart sank at the sight of a small, glaring patch of bright red blood rapidly expanding across the white bandages on He Yuzhu's waist and abdomen. Panicking, He Daqing glared murderously at my mother and me, screaming that he would risk his life to drag us down with him if anything happened to his son. He rushed out of the room to frantically call for a doctor. An impatient young nurse arrived and, after being begged by a tearful He Daqing, finally went to fetch a physician. Inside the ward, He Yuzhu turned pale with terror as he watched the spreading bloodstains. The doctor quickly examined the wound, declared that the stitches had reopened, and ordered everyone outside. While the medical staff went back to work, my mother showed zero remorse. Complaining that she was hungry, she casually tugged at my sleeve and asked if we could go find a wonton or noodle stall for lunch. The nearby police officers exchanged disgusted glances, finding her heartless attitude astounding. Blushing deeply with embarrassment, I forcefully pulled my mother's hand away and pleaded with her to stay quiet. Terrified of He Daqing's wrath and the possibility of going to jail or facing retaliation, I timidly approached He Daqing in the corridor. I apologized profusely, explaining that I never meant to kick him, and promising to pay whatever compensation was necessary to make things right. As I was pleading with him, the ward door swung open, and the doctor stepped out. As the doctor removed his mask, he reassured Jia Dongshu that He Yuzhu was going to be fine. The stitches had simply come undone from emotional distress and had already been restitched, and normal fertility would not be affected. Breathing a massive sigh of relief, Jia Dongshu eagerly turned to He Daqing and asked to discuss financial compensation to settle the matter immediately. He Daqing stared at him for a moment before demanding 5 million yuan. Hearing this outrageous sum, my mother, Jia Zhangxi, instantly jumped forward, shouting that it was robbery and flatly refusing to pay a single penny. She even threatened mutual destruction, declaring that she would take the blame and go to jail with her son rather than hand over their hard-earned savings. Seeing this aggressive standoff, the police officers frowned in frustration. Fearing that the situation would slip out of hand and ruin his chance at getting paid, He Daqing quickly pulled away from Jia Zhangxi and dragged my mother and me into a quiet corner of the corridor to negotiate. After some tense back-and-forth haggling, He Daqing dropped his demand to 4 million, while my mother countered with 1.5 million, threatening that his children would be left unlooked after if he went to jail. Before the negotiation could fall apart, a terrified Jia Dongshu panicked at the thought of losing his job and going to prison. Desperate to end the nightmare, I blurted out an offer of 3 million yuan. Seizing the sudden windfall, He Daqing quickly accepted the amount, masking his delight with a feigned sigh about our long-standing neighborly ties. The three of us returned to the police officers to officially announce our agreement. The middle-aged officer pulled out his notebook, recorded the voluntary settlement of 3 million yuan in lump sum compensation, and had both parties sign and fingerprint the document. He sternly warned us that the case was officially closed and that any future trouble would result in immediate arrest and sentencing. With the agreement finalized, the procedures were quickly wrapped up, bringing a chaotic end to the ordeal while far away at Liu Clan Rolling Steel Mill. As I finished working on a batch of parts in the workshop, my junior brother Ye Peng excitedly whispered that Jia Dongshu had been taken away by the police. Knowing Jia Dongshu's disgusting behavior, I deliberately repeated the news loudly so our co-workers could hear, asking Yue Peng about the situation. Yue Peng, who had an uncle working in the factory office, explained that the police had shown up right at the factory gates to arrest him. The news instantly drew a crowd of curious co-workers who began discussing Jia Dongshu's sudden arrest. People criticized his hidden malicious nature and shifty eyes. Soon, an experienced craftsman named Wang turned to Yi Zhonghai, who was quietly working nearby, and asked if he knew anything since they lived in the same courtyard. Visibly annoyed at being dragged into the mess, Yi Zhonghai carefully adjusted his expression to look surprised and helpless, claiming he was just an ordinary neighbor who knew nothing about Jia Dongshu's private actions. Privately, Yi Zhonghai cursed the Jia family for their extreme stupidity. Even Boss Liu heard about the commotion from a phone call, though upon learning it was only a leave of absence to cooperate with an investigation rather than a formal arrest, he decided not to get involved. When my mother and I returned home from work, we were greeted by the light, rhythmic sound of a sewing machine. Sitting by the window, Qin Huairu was focused on pedaling and meticulously mending an old work uniform of mine that had worn out elbows and shoulders. Seeing us return, she smiled warmly with flushed cheeks, explaining that she had spent the day organizing, airing out, and mending our clothes. My mother examined her neat stitching and praised her diligence, while I felt deeply touched by my wife's care and affection. After washing up, I went inside to try on the mended clothes as my wife and mother set the table for dinner. As my mother and I inspected my old work uniform, Wang Xiulin noticed it was a bit too tight for my broadened shoulders. Qin Huairu immediately blamed herself for wasting time and thread, but my mother warmly patted her hand, praising her straight, even stitches and cleverness. Curious, I asked my wife where she learned to sew. Smiling shyly, Qin Huairu explained that she had taught herself by watching a woman in her village who owned a sewing machine. When I openly praised her intelligence and skill in front of my mother, her cheeks flushed bright red. Urging us to eat before the food got cold, she tried to change the subject. Suddenly, loud shouting and cursing from the middle courtyard interrupted our meal. Exchanging knowing, excited glances, the three of us grabbed our bowls and food, eagerly joining the neighborhood crowd to watch the latest spectacle. Rushing to the scene, we found a tense standoff between Liu Haizhong with his wife, Zheng Dajiao, and Jia Zhangxi. Jia Zhangxi was fiercely arguing with them, demanding payment because Liu Haizhong's eldest son, Liu Guangqi, had accidentally run into her and broken her bowl. When I noticed 2 large red handprints and a bleeding lip on Liu Guangqi's face, I deliberately spoke up loudly, suggesting that the kid's brain might have been damaged by the slaps. A helpful neighbor immediately chimed in, warning Liu Haizhong that a damaged brain could ruin his son's future and urging him to take the boy to the hospital. Fearing for his beloved eldest son's future, Liu Haizhong flew into a blind rage and lunged forward to kick Jia Zhangxi. Surprisingly agile after her recent brawl with He Daqing, Jia Zhangxi nimbly dodged. Liu Haizhong missed completely, lost his balance, and twisted his ankle. Seeing her husband hurt and her son dazed, Zheng Dajiao wisely decided not to tangle further with the crazy woman. Yelling at her husband to drop it, she urged him to take Guangqi to the hospital immediately. Limping in pain, Liu Haizhong pointed a shaking finger at Jia Zhangxi, threatening her with a lawsuit if anything happened to his son, before his wife rushed him and Guangqi away. Watching them retreat, I couldn't help but chuckle at Liu Haizhong's all-bark, no-bite performance. Having emerged victorious from the chaos, Jia Zhangxi strutted around like a proud rooster, her bruised face filled with a smug grin, before her eyes finally landed on my mother, sitting right in the front row of the crowd. Emboldened by her recent small victory, Jia Zhangxi suddenly turned her sharp, sarcastic tongue toward my mother, Wang Xiulan. Taunting her for also being a widow, she mockingly asked why my mother was acting so high and mighty. The courtyard instantly fell silent as neighbors watched in anticipation, while my new wife, Qin Huairu, looked on with deep concern. Infuriated, I immediately set my bowl down and rolled up my sleeves to teach her a lesson myself. However, my mother calmly stopped me, handing me her bowl and stepping forward with an icy, calm expression. When Jia Zhangxi tried to dodge backward as she had done earlier, my mother anticipated the movement. With lightning-fast precision, she grabbed Jia Zhangxi's jacket collar, hauled her back, gripped her greasy, disheveled hair, and delivered 2 loud, resounding slaps right across Jia Zhangxi's already bruised face. As Jia Zhangxi shrieked in agony and tried to scratch back, my mother coldly raised her heavy winter-padded boot and delivered a series of brutal kicks to her thighs. Pinned to the ground, Jia Zhangxi could only wail and appeal to the neighbors for help, while Jia Dongshu cowered in fear inside their house, too terrified to intervene. The surrounding neighbors watched in stunned silence, feeling a secret sense of relief rather than sympathy. Standing protectively beside Qin Huairu, I watched with immense satisfaction, knowing that my mother's display of dominance was a necessary declaration that our family would never be pushed around. Once Jia Zhangxi's howls subsided into weak groans, my mother calmly straightened her clothes and laid down the law, warning Jia Zhangxi that if she ever spewed her filth again, she would receive a beating every time she showed her face. With that, my mother turned to my wife and me, telling us it was time to head back inside for the night. As we walked away, Qin Huairu's eyes sparkled with awe, excitedly praising my mother for being so decisive and cool. My mother proudly advised her that in a harsh world where the meek were constantly trampled, one had to be tough and fearless. Far from discouraging it, I wholeheartedly supported the lesson, knowing that since my mother and I worked all day, a strong, assertive personality was the best way for Qin Huairu to protect herself while home alone in this chaotic courtyard. The evening after the beating, Liu Haizhong's wife, Zheng Dajiao, came to our house carrying gifts, pretending to visit as a neighbor. In reality, her husband, Lao Liu, was thrilled to hear that my mother had beaten up Jia Zhangxi, viewing it as a form of revenge for the humiliation he suffered when his son was struck. Hoping to form an alliance and restore their dignity in the courtyard, Liu Hong had sent his wife over with 2 tin cans of fruit and a small packet of pastries. When Zheng Dajiao left, I chuckled at the unexpected gifts. My mother decided we should open and eat the canned fruit immediately, following her hometown philosophy that free food should be enjoyed right away, while everyone is happy, rather than saved. Although my new wife, Qin Huairu, was initially surprised by such extravagance, she happily complied. I opened the tin with a cleaver, tasted the sweet syrup, and gladly left the rest for my mother and wife to enjoy. Over the next 2 months, the courtyard remained unusually quiet. Jia Zhangxi had lost her arrogance after being beaten by my mother, and was still smarting from the heavy 3 million yuan compensation she had to pay. He Daqing had already brought He Yuzhu home, and after recovering, Xia Zhu returned to the restaurant to continue learning his cooking skills. Meanwhile, Jia Dongshu, desperate to avoid running into He Yuzhu, started arriving at the factory before dawn. Ironically, this early schedule gave him extra time to practice his craft and study blueprints, eventually earning praise from his co-workers for his improved skills. Before we knew it, it was the 29th day of the 12th lunar month, bringing the year to a close. The factory gave everyone the afternoon off, while the morning was spent collecting wages and holiday welfare benefits, the most anticipated moment of the entire year. After receiving our holiday welfare benefits and wages, Yapeng and I chatted happily about the upcoming 4 or 5 day break. Boss Liu was unusually generous this year, providing pork, walnuts, soap, and snacks instead of just unwanted towels. While calculating the factory's massive holiday expenditures, I realized how much these extra provisions meant to the workers, especially since the meat would easily supplement our New Year's dumpling fillings. Yapeng excitedly talked about bringing his share home to impress his mother and save up for a brand new Phoenix bicycle next year. After dividing up our master's portion, we waited as Chen Yuanhai returned carrying a much larger net bag filled exclusively for top-tier master craftsmen. Peering inside, Yue Peng and I were dazzled by the premium items: milk powder, canned fruit, and a whole carton of filtered Great Front Gate cigarettes. Teasing my junior brother, I told him that with enough hard work and a decade of learning, he might earn a bag like that one day, prompting our master to playfully tap my head and tell me to stay grounded. We soon arrived at the finance department building, where 8 windows were efficiently processing payments. Handing over my workshop payment slip, I received 400,000 yuan in red banknotes, signing the ledger before tightly wrapping and stuffing the money into my inner coat pocket. Since New Year street thieves were notoriously active and actively targeted well-paid craftsmen, workers instinctively gathered in groups to travel home safely. I waited in a sheltered corner near the factory gate until my mother, Wang Xulan, walked out with her co-workers. Greeting Liu Haizhong and Yi Zhonghai politely, we joined the group of neighbors from South Luogu Lane to walk home together. Returning home with my salary, I handed 10 bills to my mother, Wang Xulan, as agreed, while giving 250,000 yuan to my wife, Qin Huairu, to manage. Keeping a small portion for myself, I watched as Qin Huairu and my mother discussed rendering the pork fat for cracklings and boiling down the rest for tomorrow's dumplings. Just then, my mother suddenly asked if we had prepared gifts for visiting my wife's parents on the 2nd day of the Lunar New Year. Both Qin Huairu and I froze in realization. Caught up in the holiday excitement, we had completely forgotten about this vital custom. Stressing that returning empty-handed in our first year of marriage would bring shame and village gossip, my mother urged us to rush out immediately before local shops closed for the holiday inventory. Panicking slightly, Qin Huairu ran out to find me watching chess in the middle courtyard. Hearing the news, I slapped my forehead in regret, grabbed my bicycle, and told her to hop on. We raced as fast as we could through the busy streets, bypassing closed neighborhood shops to head straight for the massive Beijing department store, determined to secure proper New Year's gifts in time. At the general merchandise counter in the Beijing department store, I purchased 2 cans of meat and 2 bottles of erguotu for 36,000 yuan. Qin Huairu neatly tucked the items into a light green nylon mesh bag provided by my mother. When I suggested we buy a bit more so her parents could walk with their heads held high in the village during our first homecoming visit, Qin Huairu hesitated out of frugality, but ultimately agreed with my reasoning. We headed upstairs to the fabric section, where a female sales clerk showed us thick, durable work cloth suitable for manual labor. Though I had no idea how much fabric was needed to make a suit, Qin Huairu expertly stepped in, purchasing enough blue work cloth for 2 complete adult sets, with extra left over for shoe soles. After completing our purchases, we turned to head home, but Qin Huairu suddenly stopped me. Looking earnest and slightly flushed, she insisted. We turned back to buy fabric for my mother as well, arguing that it wouldn't be right for her parents to have new clothes while my mother went without. Touched by her thoughtfulness and filial heart, I smiled warmly and readily agreed, running back with her to pick out a matching set for my mother. Returning home to our courtyard, my mother greeted us from the kitchen, telling us to wash up for dinner. Qin Huairu grabbed an empty bucket and rushed toward the middle courtyard to fetch water from the tap, but as soon as she passed through the moon gate, she nearly bumped into someone. As Qin Huairu walked toward the middle courtyard to fetch water, an aggressive woman suddenly rushed out and aggressively cursed her for not watching where she was going. Recognizing the bluff and noticing the suspicious, darting eyes of the short, thin man accompanying her, Qin Huairu steeled her nerves and loudly shouted that a thief had broken into the courtyard. Hearing her cries, I rushed over with a stick while my mother grabbed a rolling pin. Neighbors quickly gathered with sticks to secure the area. The arrogant woman shrieked that her distant brother-in-law knew people in the police, while the short man falsely claimed they were visiting relatives. However, I noticed suspicious bulges in their bundles and brand new clothes hidden underneath their old padding. When I demanded to know who they were visiting, the panicked man mistakenly claimed to be Liu Haizhong's cousin. Liu Haizhong immediately stepped forward and exposed the lie, declaring he had no such cousin. Cornered, the short man turned ruthless and reached into his waistband for a weapon. Spotting the threat, I immediately darted forward, shielded my wife, and swung my wooden stick hard against his arm and shoulder, knocking him to the ground with the help of neighboring residents. Their dropped bags flew open, spilling stolen watches and new clothes that belonged to our neighbors. The woman collapsed and begged for mercy. As Yi Zhonghai hypocritically stepped in to tell us to stop beating them after the danger had passed, I coldly called him out for running away, instead of helping like Uncle Liu and Grandpa Li. Suddenly, the short man on the ground managed to pull a short weapon from his waistband. Without hesitation, my mother rushed forward and delivered a crushing stomp directly onto his hand, snapping his bones with a loud crack and causing him to faint instantly from the agony. Unfortunately, the impact of her stamp also caused the hidden weapon to discharge. Bang! The dull explosion was instantly followed by Yi Zhonghai's piercing scream as he collapsed onto the brick floor. Clutching his bleeding left leg near the ankle, he cried out in agony. His frantic wife, Li Cuiwei, rushed over from her doorway and immediately started shifting blame, screaming furiously at my mother and me, accusing us of causing the accident and wishing aloud that the bullets had hit the rest of the neighbors instead. Liu Haizhong rushed forward to check the wound, wisely deciding against sending Yi Zhonghai to the hospital without police authorization to avoid police interrogation and Li Cui's erratic accusations. Realizing the gravity of a gunshot wound, I offered to ride my bicycle to fetch the police immediately so they could officially handle the thieves and arrange transport to the hospital. Comforting my shaken wife, I told her and my mother to lock themselves safely inside our home. Meanwhile, the neighbors securely tied up the thieves. Yu Zhu grabbed a rope and eagerly helped, channeling his lingering frustration from the past 2 months into brutal efficiency. when Liu Haizhong tried to retrieve the pistol from the unconscious thief's broken hand. A gloomy and visibly disturbed He Yuju stepped in. With a chilling, glazed smile, he pried the weapon loose, ignoring warnings, and secretly hoping the gun would fire again toward the Jia family's door. Fortunately, the weapon remained silent, and He Yuju reluctantly handed it over to a trembling Liu Haizhong, who wrapped it in cloth. Liu Haizhong instructed the crowd to disperse and wait for me to return with the public security officers. As I pedaled my bicycle toward the alley entrance to fetch the authorities, I couldn't help but marvel at the bizarre turn of events. As I pedaled out of the alley, I spotted two patrolling police officers and quickly stopped them to report the crime, explaining that a thief had broken into our courtyard at number 95 Nanluoguxiang, fired a gun, and shot a neighbor in the leg. The officers immediately grew serious upon hearing firearms were involved. After confirming the suspects were caught and the situation was contained, they told me to lead the way, and we sped back to the courtyard. Neighbors who had just dispersed rushed back out to see the police arrive. Seeing an opportunity, I let Liu Haizhong take center stage to brief the authorities, which completely satisfied his eager desire to perform. Beaming with pride and puffing out his belly, Liu Haizhong ordered the bound thieves to be pushed forward like captured criminals. He launched into an exaggerated, theatrical account of how he bravely fought off the armed culprits, gesturing wildly while presenting the wrapped pistol as evidence. The older police officer examined the weapon and quickly interrupted Liu Haizhong's self-aggrandizing speech. Hearing Yi Zhonghai's painful groans coming from inside his house, the officer asked about the injured neighbor. Eager to stay in the spotlight, Liu Haizhong rushed over to bang on Yi Zhonghai's door and demand entry for the police. As the middle-aged police officer stepped forward to check on Yi Zhonghai, Li Cui suddenly yanked the door open and accidentally splashed a basin of soapy water straight over his head. Horrified to see she had drenched a public security officer instead of Liu Haizhong, she turned pale and frantically apologized. Controlling his temper, the officer simply warned her to check outside before throwing water. He then entered the house to examine Yi Zhonghai's gunshot wound and take a record before leaving instructions to wait for further arrangements. Bored by the ongoing commotion, I slipped away from the middle courtyard and returned home to check on my wife. Entering the inner room, I found Qin Huairu completely unfazed and busy searching for old cotton-padded jackets to make a new jacket for my mother. When she casually brushed off the terrifying gun incident by comparing it to the brutal, chaotic pig slaughtering scenes in her village, I realized how mentally resilient she was. To help her reach the top of the high cabinet, I playfully hoisted her onto my shoulders, stealing a quick kiss as I set her back down, which left her blushing furiously. After we finished our meal, a group of police officers returned to escort the bound thieves and their stolen goods away. Shortly after, Yi Zhonghai was loaded onto a bicycle and taken to the hospital under police supervision to receive proper treatment for his gunshot wound. With the entire chaotic ordeal finally over, the courtyard settled into a quiet, cold darkness as everyone retreated indoors for the night. Just as I was about to go to sleep with my wife, another piercing scream echoed from outside. Unable to resist Qin Huairu's bright, curious eyes, I sighed, put on my cotton coat, and braved the freezing night wind to see what was happening in the backyard. Arriving at the scene, I found Xu Damao's mother wailing on the steps while Xu Fugui stood with a gloomy expression, and Xu Damao hid in a corner with a handprint on his face. A sleepy, annoyed Liu Haizhong waddled over in his slippers, demanding to know what all the commotion was about. When Xu Fugui tearfully complained that their house had been burgled, Liu Haizhong casually replied that everyone already knew about the thief caught earlier that day. Furious and bewildered, Xu Fugui couldn't believe Liu Haizhong's tone, especially when Liu Haizhong smugly suggested that the family should show their appreciation to the courtyard neighbors with peanuts, melon seeds, or candy. Enraged by the absurd logic, Xu Fugui turned his anger on Xu Damao, furiously beating the boy for staying out late to watch a movie and leaving the house unattended. Stepping forward from the crowd, I intervened to save Xu Damao, telling Xu Fugui the good news that the thief had already been caught and the police had recovered the stolen goods. Overjoyed, Shufugui grabbed my hand in deep gratitude. After he apologized to the awakened neighbors and promised to retrieve his stolen belongings from the police station, the next day, everyone finally dispersed. The following morning arrived, marking New Year's Eve. It was New Year's Eve, and our neighbor Yanbugui had set up his usual holiday stall in front of his house to write and sell Spring Festival couplets. Not wanting to buy from vendors outside and risk souring neighborhood relations, I walked over to see his prices. Flattered by the surrounding neighbors, Yanbugui boasted about his calligraphy skills and jacked up his prices, though he generously gave a discount to our bachelor neighbor, Ren Weifeng, for sweet-talking him. When Yanbugui noticed me, he aggressively pitched a grand order for my first year of marriage, promising a magnificent long couplet, a horizontal scroll, and multiple Fu and Chun characters. Seeing his enthusiasm, I agreed and asked him to choose an auspicious theme. Pondering for a moment, Yanbugui proudly suggested a couplet inspired by the newly implemented marriage law. Free marriage brings deep affection, and democratic family brings lasting happiness, with the horizontal scroll reading, new customs fill the courtyard. Though my own marriage had been arranged rather than a product of free love, I thought the couplet sounded fitting and festive, so I approved it. With a confident flick of his brush, Yanbugui neatly penned the characters, while the crowd watched in admiration. After he finished, he tallied up the cost to 6,000 yuan. I told him to leave the paper out to dry while I ran home to get the money, leaving Yanbugui to take orders from other neighbors. As the busy stall continued to draw a crowd, a shadowy figure snuck up to the table and slyly reached out to touch the freshly written characters. Just as Yang Reihua reached for the freshly written Spring Festival couplets, a hand snatched them away. Yanbugui looked up from his brushwork and saw that the culprit was none other than his 11-year-old eldest son, Yan Jicheng. Caught red-handed, Yan Jicheng turned pale and tried to excuse himself, claiming he was just tidying up a mess. Infuriated, Yanbugui knew his son too well and realized the boy was trying to steal the couplets to sell or trade for snacks elsewhere. The gathering crowd of neighbors immediately paused their purchases to watch the family drama unfold. Ren Weifeng and another neighbor whispered bets among themselves about whether Yan Jicheng was going to get beaten. Hearing his mother raise a bamboo stick and seeing his father's genuine anger, Yan Jicheng grew terrified and tearfully begged for mercy, pleading that today was New Year's Eve. Haltingly, Yang Rihua and Yanbugui decided to spare him a beating for the sake of the holiday and good business. Instead, Yanbugui put him to work, forcing him to carefully lay out the wet couplets to dry without supervision over the money or goods. Pushing through the disappointed spectators, who were hoping for a good fight, I handed Yanbugui the money and the small bag of peanuts. As he meticulously licked his fingers to count the bills, I noticed Yan Jicheng glancing furtively toward the courtyard gate. Following his gaze, I spotted a young girl of about 10 standing under the locust tree, clearly caught in a classic childhood romance. The sight triggered distant memories from my past life, reminding me of how foolishly I used to avoid girls out of embarrassment, only to watch my childhood neighbors fall for other guys later on. Watching Yan Jicheng and the young girl, a mischievous thought crossed my mind. Thinking it was my duty to help, for Yan Jicheng's own good, I wondered if I should nip this precocious affection in the bud so he could focus entirely on his studies. While Yan Jicheng mechanically hung the Spring Festival couplets at his father's stall, he kept stealing glances at the little girl waiting by the courtyard gate. Deciding that it was my responsibility as an elder to set him straight and save him from going astray, I deliberately decided to intervene for his own good and nip this childhood crush in the bud. Raising my voice, I loudly called out to Yan Jicheng, asking why he was stuck doing chores while other kids were out playing. I then aggressively pivoted the conversation, praising him and asking his parents about his school grades and studies. Prompted by my questions, an irritated Yang Reihua publicly scolded her son for his plummeting grades, turning Yan Jicheng's face bright red with embarrassment. Continuing my supportive act, I casually floated the idea that he might be distracted by a relationship with some girl. Hearing this, Yan Bugui angrily declared that he would break his son's legs if anyone his age dared to date. My loud talking successfully accomplished its mission. When I glanced back toward the courtyard gate a moment later, the little girl had already vanished. Though I briefly felt a bit mischievous, I convinced myself I was saving Yan Jieqing so he could focus on his studies instead of wandering down the wrong path. Returning home with the couplets, I showed the long red strips to my wife, Qin Huairu, who inspected them and praised the neat writing. Just as we were admiring them, my mother called out from the kitchen for help with dinner. Assuring Qin Huairu that I was fully capable of hanging the couplets up by myself, I sent her off to assist my mother while I prepared to decorate our doorways for the new year. After spending the morning finishing our spring festival couplets, my mother, my wife Qin Huairu, and I gathered around the table for lunch. Qin Huairu happily recited our couplet. Free marriage brings deep affection. Democratic family brings lasting happiness, noting how well it suited our new life. During our meal, my mother mentioned that Auntie Lee had stopped by to ask if I wanted to join a neighborhood initiative, organized by officials that afternoon to sweep yards and hang couplets for military dependents and elderly people living alone. Knowing the importance of building a good reputation, I immediately volunteered. Before heading out, I stopped by a street stall to buy Jin fireworks, strings of firecrackers, and sparklers, intentionally avoiding cheap, fast-burning firecrackers to ensure my mother and wife could safely celebrate while staying up to welcome the new year. I then met up with Auntie Lee at the alley entrance. Seeing her struggle with two large bamboo branch brooms, I hoisted them onto my shoulder to carry them for her. Auntie Lee grabbed some old towels, and together we headed toward the police station, where volunteers were told to gather. As we walked, Auntie Lee praised the government's efforts to ensure that families who had contributed to the country and elderly citizens living alone could enjoy a clean, bright new year. I fully agreed, knowing that many hands make light work. Upon arriving at the police station plaza, I suddenly spotted a familiar face among the crowd. Arriving at the meeting point in front of the police station, I was surprised to run into Xu Fugui. He complained that his newly bought second-hand watch was still broken, and that the police were still interrogating the thieves because they suspected the culprits had accomplices. Expressing his deep gratitude for how my family and the neighbors helped recover his stolen goods, he thanked me sincerely before Auntie Lee called me over to begin our volunteer work. Auntie Lee explained that our first stop was the home of Grandpa Liu, an elderly man whose family was a martyr's family, with his eldest son having fallen in battle and his grandson currently serving with the army across the Yalu River. Hearing this, my perspective shifted, making this community service feel deeply meaningful. When we arrived at his small, dilapidated courtyard, Grandpa Liu tried to politely turn us away, insisting he could manage on his own. However, Auntie Lee warmly ushered us inside. Though simple, the courtyard was kept meticulously clean. Noticing some loose tiles on the roof that could leak during winter snows, Wu Zhigang retrieved our group's ladder, and I climbed up to fix them while Sun Jiangguo and Wu Zhigang helped with other chores. We also straightened some loose furniture and pasted bright red Spring Festival couplets by the door, instantly bringing a festive holiday atmosphere to his home. Over the rest of the afternoon, our group visited several other military dependents and elderly residents living alone, helping them clean, decorate, and chat about their lives. When we returned to the police station at the end of the day, the person in charge delivered a heartfelt speech thanking us for volunteering on New Year's Eve to support the families of our frontline soldiers. As we wrapped up, Auntie Lee handed everyone a commemorative tin tea mug bearing the words, "Labor is glorious," as a token of appreciation. With the volunteer work successfully completed, I finally headed back toward my courtyard. However, just as I stepped inside the gates, someone suddenly pulled me aside.